Chapter 61. One wave has barely subsided before another rises. Nathan drew back his thoughts and gave the blade a shake, sending droplets of blood flying. His eyes fell on Mizutani Shizuko and the Iwagakure Chunin she was struggling against. After 20 minutes of relentless combat, Shizuko was clearly outmatched. Her lithe frame bore fresh cuts and bruises, and her stamina was waning. As a young kunoichi with only basic physical strength, she was on the brink of defeat. That was why Nathan had chosen to cut down Nishimura Ishihira when he had the chance, rather than prolong his own duel. He needed to tip the scales in Shizuko's favor. With a swift motion, Nathan drew a kunai from his belt and hurled it toward the enemy Chunin. The blade whistled through the air, a precise arc aimed at Shizuko's would-be executioner. On the other side of the clearing, Hirai Ichiro was winding up for the final strike. He just raised his kunai to deliver a killing blow to Shizuko when Nathan's weapon cut in. Sensing the sudden threat, Ichiro twisted his body and narrowly avoided the incoming kunai, his eyes flicking toward Nathan as he prepared to counterattack. After confirming the area was clear, Hirai Ichiro turned his gaze to where the kunai had landed. He didn't need to look to know something shocking had happened, but when he did, his heart sank. A moment ago, he'd seen Nathan locked in fierce combat with Chunin Nishimura Ishihei. They'd been trading blows evenly, and now, without warning, Ishihei lay dead at Nathan's feet. Ichiro wasn't close to Ishihei, but he'd sparred with him enough times to appreciate his skill. While Ishihei might not have ranked among the very top Chunin, he was still leagues stronger than most. Yet here he was, felled by a boy not even old enough to shave. If that was the case, then Nathan's true power must dwarf his own. The boy's uniform remained spotless, as though he hadn't even broken a sweat, an image that sent an icy knot of dread through Ichiro's chest. The more formidable an opponent, the more perilous his own situation. What could he do? He scanned the battlefield, seeking reinforcements, but there were none. The Iwa shinobi had been outnumbered from the start, and after more than 20 minutes of brutal close-quarters fighting, their ranks were nearly decimated. Survivors were scarce, and the moment to act was slipping away. Nathan surveyed the battlefield. The only Iwa shinobi strong enough to help him were each pinned down by 2 or 3 Konoha ninja, and none could break free in time. He had to count on himself. Across from him, Hirai Ichiro spun and tossed a kunai before immediately forming hand seals, preparing a jutsu. Nathan rolled aside to avoid the blade, and in one fluid motion, traced the 6 seals: rat, ox, tiger, rabbit, dragon, ox. He drew in a deep breath, focused chakra in his throat, then unleashed a rapid-fire volley of flame streams like bullets from a machine gun. In an instant, dozens of miniature fire jets, thin but scorching, erupted from Nathan's mouth, hurtling straight toward Ichiro. The sight was so swift that Ichiro's sealing hands froze midair. A single thought thundered through his mind. How could he release that many fireballs so quickly? The answer was obvious. Since Nathan had devoted himself to mastering the fire release, Phoenix Immortal Fire Technique, one of the 3 advanced fire-style jutsu, his skill had grown exponentially. Nathan channeled only a quarter of his chakra into the technique, yet even that was enough to push it to level 3, 226/1000. At this degree of mastery, an ordinary Chunin was no match, especially not against his dimensional slash. Victory came down to striking first, and Nathan did exactly that. Though he began his jutsu a fraction of a second later than his opponent, he completed it first, and trapped Ichiro Hirai in a deadly stalemate. If Hirai pressed on with his own ninjutsu, Nathan's blade would cut him down. If he gave up, his hard-fought advantage would evaporate. Forced to choose between a certain strike and humiliating defeat, he swallowed his pride and stumbled backward, breaking his concentration to evade the incoming attack. But before he could put distance between them, Shizuko Mizutani seized the opening. With a sharp exhale, she sent a flurry of shurikens spinning through the air, each steel point aimed at Hirai's vital zones. The sharp whoosh of metal on wind cut through the tense stillness of the arena, and the battle reached its next perilous phase. Nathan's fireball struck true. Hirai Ichiro barely dodged the shuriken Mizutani Shizuko had thrown, only to have the blaze scorch his left arm. He cursed under his breath as the pain flared, drawing an involuntary frown. Seizing the moment, Nathan vanished in a blink and reappeared at Ichiro's flank, sword poised for the kill. Ichiro spun away, narrowly avoiding the strike, but Nathan pressed him relentlessly. Each feint, each slash was calculated to exploit that wounded arm. Ichiro weaved left and right, refusing to engage directly, yet Nathan's strategy was clear: force him into a head-on clash. At last, with nowhere left to retreat, Ichiro squared his shoulders. Metal rang on metal as the two blades met. Nathan drove forward, and in a single precise cut, he nearly severed Ichiro's left arm at the elbow. Drip, drip, drip. Scarlet droplets traced down Ichiro's forearm, pooled in his palm, and fell to the ground. The pain was excruciating, but Ichiro did not flinch. Gritting his teeth, he kept his eyes locked on Nathan's blade, every heartbeat echoing the resolve that he would not yield, no matter the cost. Though the duel lasted only moments, everyone watching could see just how formidable Nathan's swordsmanship was. It was no wonder that Nishimura Ishihira had fallen so quickly under his blade. With skill like that, even a chonin, and arguably not even a jonin, could endure only a few strikes. None of us dared look away for fear of a sudden, lethal blow. Nathan had no need for fancy tricks now. A straightforward assault would suffice. He sprang forward, steel clashing sharply as dagger met kunai. Ding-dong, dang-dang. 2 minutes later, he seized an opening. With a cold hiss of metal slicing flesh, his dagger plunged into Hirai Ichiro's lower abdomen. Ichiro's eyes widened in shock. He coughed, blood bubbling at his lips. In a final, desperate act, he slapped a detonating talisman to his chest, hoping to yank Nathan into the explosion. But exhaustion had dulled his movements. By the time he reached out, Nathan had already slipped back out of range, and the blast never came. In an instant, a violent explosion tore through the clearing, and a pillar of red flame shot skyward, swallowing Ichiro Hirai in its blistering heat. Only then did Mizutani Shizuko break cover. The fight had moved so fast she'd had no chance to jump in. She'd remained on the fringes, catching her breath. Ninjas possess stamina far beyond that of ordinary people, and in mere seconds, Shizuko had already restored much of her strength. Nathan opened his mouth to warn her, but a new presence at his side froze him mid-word. Still keyed up from battle, Shizuko reflexively raised her kunai, but Nathan didn't flinch. It wasn't that his reflexes lagged. Rather, he recognized the newcomer instantly and refused to act rashly. Before them stood Captain Haruki Mori, the special jonin in charge of several of their squads. Haruki Mori brushed off Mizutani Shizuko's alarmed outburst and barked, "You! Move out for Sector E3 right now. Report to the second squad's captain on arrival." Without waiting for a reply, he darted off in the opposite direction. Nathan fell in behind him, weaving through the shattered remnants of the battlefield until he caught sight of 2 Konoha Chunin hunkered down behind a toppled wall. Their masks hung loose and weapons rested at the ready. They were clearly taking a breather after fending off an enemy attack. It didn't take long for Nathan to piece it together. The enemy was mustering reinforcements. But Sector E3? That secondary route led straight from Iwagakure's headquarters down to the Forwar D logistics base. Could Yanyin village have sent troops to reinforce the supply line? The more Nathan thought about it, the more it made sense, and the more exasperated he became. He clenched his fists and muttered under his breath, "Just when you think you've handled one crisis, another's waiting right around the corner." Chapter 62. Elite Shizuko Mizutani wasn't foolish. The moment she heard Haruki Mori's urgent summons to hurry to Sector E3, alarm bells rang in her mind. "Nathan?" she asked, panic lacing her voice. Nathan flashed her a calm, reassuring look. "Let's move." He swiftly packed up his gear and took off down the slope, Shizuko right beside him. Behind them, a handful of Konoha Chunin, freshly dispatched by Haruki, fell in step. Sector E3 lay along a secondary mountain track that connected the Hidden Leaf's ninja headquarters to its logistics base. From the River Valley corridor where they stood, it was less than a kilometer in a straight line. By cutting across the wooded incline, they reached it in just a few minutes. When they arrived, over 50 Leaf Shinobi were already assembled. Most were chonin and jonin, with only a smattering of jinin, and even fewer young warriors like Nathan and Shizuko. Their sudden appearance drew curious glances around the clearing, but Nathan had grown used to that over countless drills and missions. He simply took his place at the edge of the formation, scanning the assembled ninjas for familiar faces and waiting for Haruki's orders. Nathan had grown accustomed to the stares. After surviving one battle after another, the attention no longer unsettled him. He'd been uneasy at first, but by now he'd learned to tune it out. Ignoring the onlookers, he guided Mizutani Shizuko into a nearby clearing and settled himself on the ground, closing his eyes. As soon as they realized he wouldn't speak, the assembled soldiers lost interest and drifted away. Silence reigned. Neither the team leader nor anyone else uttered a word. They simply rested, letting their bodies recover from the fight. Gradually, more figures straggled into the clearing. 5 minutes later, over 100 warriors stood around them. Nathan opened his eyes and took in the sight of the injured ninjas. Their wounds were far worse than he'd feared. If their combat strength had been intact, they wouldn't have been transferred here in such a depleted state. He frowned. Is this really all we've got left? He wondered. Before the battle, they had 300 fighters. Now barely a third remained. Chapter X. Reinforcements arrive. The fighting in the valley corridor had been brutal. Even with our numerical advantage over the rock ninja, we still lost dozens of comrades. And the battle was far from over. Fresh troops were desperately needed on the front lines. Scouts estimated that only about 100 more shinobi could be transferred in at this point, yet more than 100 still remained deployed. Konoha had already sent every available reserve, a clear sign that our enemy was no ordinary force. Nathan shook off his doubts with a sigh and looked toward the captain of the second squad. The others followed suit, their expressions tense. Rising to his feet, the captain clapped his hands sharply and addressed the group. All right, everyone, listen up. It's time. As you've probably guessed, a detachment of reinforcements from Iwagakure will be passing through here very soon. Prepare to welcome them, and get ready to push forward together. Our mission is simple. Hold them off, and buy as much time as possible for Team 3 to destroy the target base. He paused, letting the weight of those words sink in. I'll divide you into 6 squads, he continued, each responsible for one defensive sector. We must prevent any reinforcements from Iwagakure from breaking through. Without waiting for questions, he began calling out names. Nathan and Mizutani Shizuko were assigned to Squad 4, charged with defending the central sector. Being in the middle meant they probably wouldn't face the enemy first, but they couldn't assume the attackers would bypass them entirely. To avoid being picked off one sector at a time, the 6 defensive zones were positioned almost seamlessly, so any breach in one line would ripple across them all. That was precisely why the captain of Squad 2 had arranged the defenses this way, to stretch out the front and slow the enemy's advance. Once the squads were set, everyone slipped into position. Nathan melted into the shadowy undergrowth of the forest, but instead of adrenaline, a heavy gloom settled over him as he waited for the battle to begin. Everything about this situation screamed extraordinary enemy, or the second squad's captain wouldn't have resorted to stalling tactics. That only amplified Nathan's unease. 45 minutes had slipped by in the blocking battle, and more than 3 hours had passed since the operation began. Their orders were clear. If the mission wasn't completed within 4 hours, they were to abort and pull out immediately. In other words, they had only minutes left to hold their line. Nathan found himself silently hoping for a further delay. Every extra second improved their odds of a clean retreat. Ideally, the enemy would never show. But he knew better. Their leader wouldn't have hurried them here without solid intelligence. If he hadn't been certain of a threat, he'd have seized the chance to wipe out the previous wave of rock ninjas instead. Nathan's stomach churned at the thought. Transferring their troops only partway across the valley would let more Rock Village shinobi survive, but at the same time, it would drive up their own casualties even further. The losses they'd already taken were staggering. There was no way the team leader would sanction such a risky maneuver unless the situation had become absolutely desperate. And if he'd gone through with it, it could only mean one thing. Someone was about to be sacrificed. As that grim realization settled over him, a sudden stir in the undergrowth snapped Nathan to attention. Before he could shout a warning, a roaring wave of golden sand exploded from the forest ahead, racing toward them like a living thing. In an instant, The torrent swallowed earth and underbrush, uprooting saplings and bending mighty trunks before them. Nathan sprang back and vaulted up the nearest tree in 2 swift bounds, coming to rest on a thick branch. From his vantage point, he watched in awe and dread as the sand current carved a wide swath through the dense foliage, stripping away every shred of cover and flushing out the hidden Konoha shinobi. At the very heart of the onslaught, standing tall amid the churning sand, was a formidable young rock village ninja. He rose with measured calm, sand cascading from his sturdy frame as though he commanded the entire flood. The battle for the valley had just reached a new, terrifying height. Nathan's eyes widened the moment he recognized him. Before him stood a burly shinobi with a ruddy ninja cap perched atop a prominent hooked nose and a thick, grizzled beard. This was Huangtu, the son of the 3rd Tsuchikage, Onoki, now 20-something and already approaching the skill of an elite jonin. Although he'd lost some of the raw power he'd once displayed during the 4th Great Ninja War, his talent was undeniable. In an instant, he'd unleashed a formidable technique, Earth Release, Flowing Rock, a jutsu capable of reshaping the battlefield itself. Behind Huangtu, fewer than 100 stone shinobi formed a tight phalanx, each at least chunin ranked, and many among the village's finest. Nathan's heart sank. He knew that facing even a fraction of this force would test him to his absolute limits, and that the real fight was only just beginning. Chapter 63. Targeting, Kill. The instant the order rang out, the opposing lines of ninjas surged forward. Dozens of Konoha shinobi in the front ranks launched their kunai, but without the element of surprise, the Rock Village warriors easily sidestepped each blade. Their defense held firm, and not a single leaf ninja scored a hit. Quick as lightning, the Rock ninjas counterattacked. Hands weaving through the familiar seals, they spat out jagged stones. At first, the fragments were little more than pebbles, but as they streaked through the air, each one grew, hardening into massive boulders that crashed down in a relentless hailstorm. This was Earth-style, rock cannon technique, one of the most basic but devastating of jutsu. A lone user might barely dent an opponent's armor, but dozens working in concert turned the sky to falling meteors. Despite the onslaught, the shinobi of Konoha's front defense proved their reputation was well earned. Shields locked and chakra barriers flared. Not a single comrade fell. The rocks shattered harmlessly against chakra defenses, and the leaf forces held the line unbroken. After their initial exchange, both sides realized they weren't facing pushovers, so they abandoned long-range tactics and dove into close-quarters combat. Soon the battlefield was a chaotic symphony of explosions, anguished cries, the clang of steel, and dust swirling in every direction. Nathan stayed focused on the fight ahead, until a sudden, frantic buzzing cut through the cacophony. Buzzing? Like a swarm of bees? His pulse quickened. He scanned the sky and spotted one insect the size of a human head hurtling toward the melee, followed by dozens of slightly smaller but still enormous bees. Instantly, he recognized them as bioengineered. No natural bee could reach that size, and even a giant bee would instinctively avoid a battlefield. Moreover, Nathan knew of the Hidden Rock Village clan famed for weaponizing giant bees. The conclusion was obvious. He turned his gaze to find the source. A rock ninja in a jonin uniform, calmly directing his fearsome, buzzing arsenal. He was short and ugly, with features that made him look almost like a deformed bee. But that wasn't the most frightening thing. At his side hovered a giant bee, its body easily 2 meters long, its mandibles glinting menacingly. The man's perception was razor-sharp. Nathan barely stole a glance before he was spotted. Noticing Nathan perched high in the treetops, the man's lips curled into a grim smile. He raised a hand, and the red swarm instantly dove toward Nathan. Nathan launched himself from the branches and sprinted for the undergrowth, but the giant bees were impossibly fast. Before he'd even covered half a dozen paces, they had overtaken him. Their bloated abdomens arched, and with violent whips of their tails, they unleashed an onslaught of stingers. Ordinary bees would kill with a single sting. These, however, had more tricks up their sleeves. Swish, 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 a dense barrage of barbed stingers hurtled through the air. Nathan had no time to fight back. He dove behind a thick tree trunk, praying the wood would stop the deadly storm. Nathan barely had time to register the first sharp thuds echoing through the hollow trunk when dozens of stingers rattled against the wood. None found purchase in his skin. He was still catching his breath when a thunderous buzz filled the air and a massive swarm of bees poured out from both ends of the tree, cutting off every escape route. Without a moment's hesitation, Nathan snapped his hands into seals. Just as the front ranks of bees lunged with barbed stingers, he unleashed his ninjutsu, fire style, phoenix fire technique. From his mouth roared a torrent of blazing fireballs, each one bursting forth like fiery petals scattered by an otherworldly bloom. The heat flared instantly, driving the bees back in a frantic scatter. These weren't ordinary hive insects, but enhanced warriors, far tougher than any wild swarm. Yet even supercharged carbon-based creatures cannot stand against pure flame. Their only hope was to evade. And evade they could not. Even without relying on the Sharingan, Nathan's refined chakra control and his mastery of the Phoenix fire technique guided each fireball with unerring precision, setting the bee colony alight in a wave of incinerating heat. Boom, boom. Explosions rippled through the clearing as wave after wave of bees burst into flames. Their bodies ballooned and collapsed into charred heaps, filling the air with the acrid scent of burnt wax. "You're asking for death, brat," Akagi bellowed, his eyes bloodshot with fury. With a flick of his wrist, he seized control of the remaining giant bees and merged them with a massive hidden hive. In an instant, the living wall of buzzing chitin and stingers encircled Nathan. The surviving drones lunged, their mandibles yanking forward as they launched globs of sticky honey. Nathan twisted away just in time, the slimy projectiles splattering harmlessly on the mossy ground. His mastery of the level 3 Konoha-style sword technique granted him reflexes far beyond an ordinary shinobi's. Without it, he'd surely be mired in that glue. Still, dodging wasn't enough. He watched the swarm closing in, its numbers tightening into a lethal tide. Once they locked ranks, there'd be no slipping through. Nathan took a steadying breath and ignited chakra in his core. There was only one way to turn the tide, fire-style jutsu. Nathan barely dodged another salvo of stings, racing forward as he completed the final hand seal. Flames coalesced at his lips, and he spat out a barrage of fireballs. Akagi flung his hive of bees aside, but Nathan's ninjutsu was too refined. Scores of insects failed to break free and were instantly charred, collapsing in smoldering heaps. Akagi's eyes burned with rage. For a moment, Nathan half expected him to unveil a Sharingan, though of course, he knew that was impossible. Shaking off the thought, Nathan noted that the swarm was already reforming, closing in with menacing buzzes. With a swift series of gestures, Nathan activated his instant body technique, vanishing from the swarm's path and reappearing several yards back. Without missing a beat, he unleashed the fire release, Phoenix Immortal Fire technique. A towering inferno roared to life, engulfing the pursuing bees and reducing them to ash in an instant. Clearly, this new fire technique was devastatingly effective. As the last embers faded, Nathan readied himself, eager for another chance to wield the Phoenix Immortal Fire technique against any opponent or any obstacle that crossed his path. For the next 30 seconds, Nathan slipped among the trees, using the forest's cover to evade the swarm's relentless assaults while he looked for an opening to strike back with ninjutsu. He succeeded in annihilating the first wave of bees before the two swarms could merge, but his success ended there. The crimson bees took command of the giant insects, driving the horde into a tightening ring around him. Once renowned alongside the Aburame clan, this insect lineage may have weakened over time, but its tactics remained deadly. Nathan tested their defense again and again, only to be repelled each time by the swarm's precise coordination, his own losses minimal. A ripple of unease passed through him as he surveyed the buzzing mass closing in. He forced a bitter smile. Time to adapt. Just then, a gap opened in the encirclement. From the swarm's heart, Red Bee stepped forward, her expression dark and determined. Nathan tensed, every muscle primed for action. Through gritted teeth, he snarled, "You Uchiha, you've slaughtered so many of my bees. Tell me, what punishment do you deserve?" The moment the man said Uchiha, Nathan's eyes flicked to the clan crest on his opponent's chest. Memories of the Shinhi clan's fall washed over him, and with it, a chilling realization. This man's vendetta against Aburame extended to every shinobi from Konoha. A plan sparked in Nathan's mind. Most jonin would never dare toy with a Kiri elite, especially one specializing in royal bees. But this adversary had chose and bees as his signature weapon. If Nathan could decapitate him quickly, the surrounding swarm would scatter. It was a gamble, but one Nathan was willing to take. With a single, fluid motion, he readied himself to strike and provoke his enemy into making the first fatal mistake. Chapter 64. Beheading. Nathan studied the buzzing swarm of insects with a casual air, then shook his head and asked, "So this is the Shenhei clan's famed insect control technique?" His tone dripped with contempt. Red Bee, heir of the Kamizuru clan, felt his blood boil. He opened his mouth to retort, but Nathan pressed on, his voice low and mocking. "At this level, you're barely on par with the Aburame clan. Ha-ha!" That single mention of the Aburame clan, coupled with Nathan's derisive laugh, shattered Red Bee's restraint. He snarled, "Uchiha brat, what do you know? If it weren't for the Aburame's cunning tactics in the last Shinobi war, my Kamizuru clan would never have fallen." "Tactics? Really?" Nathan let out a short, scornful chuckle. "If you can't match others honestly, it doesn't make you clever. It just makes you weak. Is this truly the pinnacle of the Shenhei clan's skill?" "Enough," Red Bee roared, veins pulsing at his temples as he prepared to unleash his chakra-infused swarm. Nathan merely smirked, eyes steady, ready for whatever came next. Red Bee's fury boiled over. "Fine, fine, fine," he snarled, repeating the word 3 times like a mantra. He ground his teeth. "Uchiha brat, you've pushed me as far as you can go. When I catch you, I hope that fiery mouth of yours is still flapping." He raised his hand, sending the swarm of iridescent drones hurtling toward Nathan. But in the next instant, 2 blood-red Magatama Sharingan eyes flickered into his vision, red whirlpools of power that reached into his mind and began to drag him under. "Sharingan? No." Panic flashed across Red Bee's face as sensation began to drain from him. Years of mental conditioning, years spent bending hive colonies to his will, fought against the hypnotic pull. At the brink of unconsciousness, Red Bee pressed his own teeth into his tongue, drawing a spray of crimson saliva. The searing pain snapped him back to full awareness. Before he could steady himself, Nathan was already moving. The Uchiha's katana arced through the air and bit into Red Bee's flesh with a wet, steel-on-bone scream. Blood erupted like a burst dam. The force of the slash sent Red Bee hurtling backwards. A jagged gash ran from his right shoulder across his chest and down to his left hip, deep enough that he felt his ribs grind and his organs shift as if he'd been cleaved in 2. Red Bee hit the ground with a cry of agony, his life teetering on the edge of oblivion, and Nathan's blade still hovered, ready to strike again. Nathan's sword would have ended Red Bee's life if the Jonin hadn't slipped back at the last possible moment. Still, the wound across Red Bee's chest ran deep, bleeding freely. Nathan frowned. Half measures wouldn't be enough. He'd opened his Sharingan precisely to deliver a single fatal strike. Anything less, and this enemy would rise again. Without hesitation, Nathan lunged forward to finish the job. But Red Bee was no ordinary shinobi. Experience and cunning had earned him his rank. Gritting his teeth against the pain, he thrust out one arm and raised his other hand in a sweeping gesture. From thin air, a swarm of bees, 100 strong, buzzed into existence, darkening the space between them. At the heart of the swarm hovered the queen bee, ready to clamp onto Nathan's blade and yank him off balance. Nathan's Sharingan flared. Time seemed to slow. Every single insect's jittering flight path laid bare before his eyes. What to most would look like a shifting, writhing mass appeared to him as individual targets, no more challenging than a line of crawling turtles. He adjusted his grip on the hilt, centered his stance, and unleashed the Konoha-style sword technique. In one fluid motion, he slashed through the swarm. Bees that dared approach vanished in threads of misted gore. The queen erupted in a shower of golden fluid as his blade sliced her in 2. Poison-laced stingers rattled uselessly on the battlefield. Red Bee staggered back, clutching his chest, his eyes wide behind the cracks in his mask. He summoned the last of his strength to retreat, but Nathan was already upon him. With a final, decisive step, Nathan's sword pressed against Red Bee's throat. Blood dripped onto the earth as Nathan's eyes, still burning crimson, judged the broken man before him. "It's over," Nathan said quietly. Red Bee offered no protest, his spirit thoroughly broken. Nathan withdrew his blade, turned on his heel, and walked away, the Sharingan's glow fading to dark pupils. There would be no future threat from this man. Not today. Nathan's movements were precise and unrelenting, each step bringing him closer to his adversary. If Red Bee had been at full strength, he might have controlled the swarm to halt Nathan's advance and slip away. But Nathan's sword strike had wounded him so gravely that he could barely stand. Blood loss was sapping his strength by the second, and he knew that if he didn't act immediately, he would be the one who perished. With a grimace, Red Bee summoned the last, forbidden secret art of the Shenhei clan, insect fusion. A piercing, otherworldly shriek burst from the huge queen bee standing at his side. Nathan watched, wary as golden honey flooded from her mandibles, drenching Red Bee's body in its thick, sticky torrent. Before he could fully register what was happening, the queen bee flared her translucent wings, dipped her massive head, and swallowed Red Bee in a single gulp. "What in the world?" Nathan muttered, momentarily thrown off balance by the bizarre sight. But confusion did not slow him. With steel in hand and determination in his veins, he pressed the attack. Nathan burst through the living barrier of buzzing soldiers and swung his sword at the giant queen bee's abdomen. Clang! The hard steel rang against something far tougher than he'd expected. His blade glanced off an unseen armor plate, and a shock jolted up his arm, sending pins and needles pain racing through his hand. Surprise flashed in Nathan's eyes. He deliberately targeted the queen's underbelly, the only part that looked vulnerable. Yet even that segment was impenetrable. If the softest spot was this strong, the rest of her must be like forged iron. A furious roar shook the cavern as the queen bee realized she was under attack. She lashed out with her serrated forelegs, each spike glinting like daggers. Nathan rolled backward, just in time to avoid a crippling blow, dust kicking up around him. He dropped into a crouch behind her, seizing the moment. With a swift motion, he drew a folded talisman from his ninja pouch and pressed it against the queen's chitinous back. Before she could counterattack, he flipped the talisman away and sprang out of reach. The queen bee, sensing the imminent threat, reared up and lashed out blindly, her massive form shaking the ground as she tried to hit him before the explosion. Nathan's Sharingan made the incoming attacks look like child's play. He slipped past each one with ease, putting distance between himself and the rampaging queen bee. Then a deafening blast rocked the clearing as one of his explosive kunai detonated right behind her. A towering pillar of red flame engulfed her in an instant. The queen bee let out a piercing roar, proof enough that the talisman had worked. Seizing the moment, Nathan hurled several more shuriken, each fitted with a detonating seal. They struck true, erupting in successive fireballs that rained embers into the sky. Under that relentless assault, the massive creature finally crumpled, its great form slumping to the ground. Still wary, Nathan gathered his chakra and wove the 6 hand seals, Si Wei, Shen, Hai, Yin. He thrust his palms forward and unleashed the fire style, great fireball technique. The enormous orb of flame shot out, aimed squarely at the fallen queen bee. It wasn't as versatile as the Phoenix fire technique, but in terms of raw, focused power, few jutsu could rival it. Nathan didn't hold back this time. Channeling 200 points of chakra in a single surge, he sent forth a colossal fireball, its force dwarfing any detonating talisman he'd ever used. The searing blaze roared through the air and struck the queen bee with earth-shattering impact. For a few heartbeats, flames danced and crackled, then suddenly the fire died away. Nathan exhaled in relief as he gazed up. The queen bee lay collapsed, her entire form charred black and utterly still. He allowed himself a moment to catch his breath until a creeping unease stopped him. All around him, the red bees hovered in perfect formation, buzzing in disciplined unison. Without a queen to guide them, they shouldn't still be organized. Their leader was dead. So why were they behaving as if nothing had changed? He crouched beside the fallen monarch and studied her abdomen. Fissures spidered across the scorched shell, small cracks widening as though something inside was pressing to break free. Nathan's heart pounded. The queen wasn't as lifeless as she first appeared, and whatever was inside her was far from finished. Chapter 65, The Art of Insect Fusion. Crack. Crack. Nathan tensed the instant he heard the faint snapping sounds. He didn't hesitate. Reaching into his ninja pouch, he drew a kunai, fastened a detonator talisman to its shaft, and hurled it at the strange, unseen entity. But before the blade could reach its target, the creature seemed to sense the attack. With a thunderous crack, it burst free from the queen bee's abdomen and shot skyward at alarming speed. Boom! The talisman detonated in midair but inflicted no damage. Through the clarity of his Sharingan, Nathan finally made out the figure's true form. It was Akagi. Yet she now bore an almost insectoid shape, standing upright like a gigantic bee. Her compound eyes bulged unnaturally, her torso hunched forward, and her arms and legs twisted at grotesque angles. Two diaphanous wings quivered on her shoulder blades. Had it not been for those lingering human features, her silhouette, her posture, Nathan might have sworn he was facing Queen Bee number 2 herself. In that moment, everything clicked into place. The unsettling resemblance that had always made Akagi seem vaguely insectile wasn't coincidence. She had undergone the very fusion he'd feared, melding human and bee into a single, terrifying entity. It was obvious that the secret technique his opponent had just used carried a dangerous side effect, one that warped its user ever closer to a bee. His sudden irritability and easily provoked anger were telltale symptoms. After all, even as a special jonin, no reasonable shinobi, whatever his grudge against the Aburame clan, would have let himself be goaded into such recklessness by Nathan's taunts. In reality, the flaw lay in the so-called insect fusion technique. Though it bestows some of a queen bee's powers, it also insidiously alters the user's body and mind toward an insect's form the longer the fusion persists. Physically, subtle carapace ridges may appear. Psychologically, a hive-like stubbornness and aggression can take hold. Because of these irreversible changes, the Shene clan has long banned the technique except in the direst circumstances. Still, one cannot deny its potency. Now, with fragile wings unfurling in a blur of crimson, the transformed shinobi, no longer fully human, but not quite bee, lifted off the ground. Nathan stared skyward, realizing there was no safe target to strike, as the red-winged form soared out of reach. Nathan watched as the crimson bee's shattered body knit itself back together. The life-threatening wound that had hovered on the brink of death was now completely healed. In that instant, the fusion of Nathan's power and the bee's own tenacity had breathed a second life into the wounded creature, and might yet tip the balance back in their favor. But as he studied the bee, Nathan's brow darkened. Something wasn't right. The insect moved sluggishly, its wings drooping more than they should. A subtle haze clung to its compound eyes, as though a spark of life had dimmed. His instincts were correct. There lay the hidden flaw of the insect fusion technique. The weaker the caster's own will, the deeper the queen bee's influence grows over the host. Before Nathan's spell, the red bee had been near death, its spirit all but crushed. Merged in that vulnerable state, the queen's dominance became absolute. In truth, this body no longer belonged to the red bee, it answered only to the queen. Even if Nathan himself fell in battle, the fusion would endure. Over time, the queen could tighten her grip, molding this form into her new throne until she ruled it entirely. That grim prospect was exactly why Akagi had hesitated so long before ever attempting the fusion. Only now, facing desperate odds, had Nathan accepted the risk. He inhaled deeply and squared his shoulders. The battle wasn't over yet, and the true test of his will was only beginning. From his posture and the way the insect chitin creaked around him, it was obvious he'd used the insect fusion technique many times before. He must have known exactly how dangerous it was, and yet he'd risked it anyway. Now, apparently, he'd lost that gamble. For Nathan, however, this was a welcome turn of events. It was far easier to take down the queen bee than to face a fully fused warrior. Even if this creature retained fragments of Akagi's memories, it could never match his former combat skill. Nathan might not have to expend much effort to finish the job. Steeling himself, Nathan locked eyes with the writhing mass of bees surrounding the towering queen. Then he moved, launching a trio of shurikens in a single, fluid motion. Thanks to his level 4 ninja tool proficiency and the razor-sharp insight of his Sharingan, each blade flew straight and true. Had the queen inherited her ancestors' iron-hard shell, not even dozens of shurikens could pierce it. But without that reinforced exoskeleton, her defenses shattered under Nathan's precise assault. Nathan's mind raced. No matter how precise his shots were, they would be useless if Akabe simply dodged. Thankfully, the giant bee sensed his intent. With a powerful beat of its wings, it slipped half a meter to the side, effortlessly evading Nathan's thrown kunai. Nathan's lips twitched in frustration. Clearly, he couldn't defeat this opponent by hurling ninja tools. There was only one option left. A fusillade of stinger-like bee needles erupted from the swarm, forcing Nathan onto the defensive. He darted between tree trunks, relying on his Sharingan-enhanced reflexes to avoid the deadly projectiles. Even so, the onslaught was so intense that an ordinary shinobi would have been overwhelmed. Seizing the brief calm after the storm of needles, Nathan gathered chakra into his hands. "Fire style, Phoenix Flame technique," he shouted. A torrent of scorching fire lanced forward, engulfing the swarm in a roaring blaze. Dozens of bees fell like falling embers, their shrieks drowned by the inferno. Akabe, however, was not so easily defeated. With a furious buzz, the massive bee reined in the surviving swarm, sending them spinning back into the air in a coordinated counterattack. Nathan braced himself. This battle was only just beginning. The battle raged back and forth through the jungle, each clash accompanied by the thunder of wood against wood and the buzz of 1,000 wings. Curious onlookers gathered at the perimeter, but with such a long front line and a wall of bees between them, no one suspected that Nathan was concealing his Sharingan. All they saw was a frenzied swarm carving through the foliage, utterly oblivious to the true struggle within. Minutes crept by as the hive dwindled, 2/3 of its defenders already down, when Nathan sensed his moment. His gaze locked onto the scarlet-bodied red bee perched atop a low branch. A quiet flicker passed through his eyes. In the next instant, however, Nathan slipped into a pool of sticky honey hidden among the leaves. The red bee's compound eyes widened in delight. With a sharp command, it drove more of its swarm forward, stingers glinting, and spat ribbons of honey toward Nathan, hoping to glue him in place. Just as the sticky strands coiled around his legs, Nathan triggered the substitute technique. In his stead, a wooden stake landed with a thud. The red bee's antennae drooped as a flash of disappointment crossed its twisted features. Panting softly, it swept its gaze over the jungle floor, searching for any sign of Nathan's true form. Nathan crouched in the shadow of a great oak when a voice rang out from its branches. "Hey, over here!" The creature known as Red Bee, no longer guarded under its former master, turned its head instinctively toward the sound. In that instant, Nathan's eyes snapped open, revealing twin scarlet Sharingan. "Genjutsu, jail hang technique," he breathed. Red Bee had been hovering high above, utterly untouchable, so Nathan had deliberately lured it into complacency. He'd feigned a misstep on the forest floor to draw its attention, then deployed the substitute technique to mask his true position and close the distance in silence. Now his genjutsu bound Red Bee's mind in an inescapable prison. As the summon, Ed Beast began to plummet, its wings useless, Nathan leaped from the tree's trunk. In midair, he drew his short sword and delivered a precise lethal slash across Red Beast's throat. Still wary, he flung a kunai into the creature's chest, piercing its heart. When Red Beast's struggles finally stilled, Nathan landed lightly and exhaled, at last allowing himself a moment's relief. He wiped his blade clean, his gaze already fixed on whatever challenge lay ahead. Nathan had anticipated this. Once he seized the perfect opening, defeating the Queen Bee's Red Bee swarm was surprisingly effortless. Chapter 66. Sudden Death. A frantic buzz filled the clearing. With the Red Bee's death, its swarm instantly lost cohesion. The insects scattered in all directions, driven by instinct alone. Nathan didn't bother to pursue them. Without their leader's command, they posed no real threat. What happened next took only moments. The rival Rock Ninja detachment, though smaller in number and weary from a forced march, faced an even more exhausted foe. Dozens of Nathan's allies were wounded, and the rest had just disembarked from another battlefield. As soon as the Rock Ninjas engaged, they recognized how depleted their opponents were. Eager to return to their own front lines, they showed no mercy. Ruthlessly and with surgical efficiency, they struck down more than 20 men before Nathan's side could mount any effective defense. In a matter of seconds, the tide had turned, and Nathan's forces lay reeling, completely on the back foot. Thanks to the sporadic reinforcements trickling in from the river valley front, The lines here had not entirely collapsed. Nathan scanned the fray, desperate for any sign of his comrade, Mizutani Shizuko. Before the swarm of chakra bees had descended, Shizuko had been locked in combat with an Iwagakure Chunin, but for the past few moments, that corner of the battlefield had fallen unsettlingly quiet. At last, Nathan spotted him. Shizuko's gait was unsteady, each step more labored than the last. His uniform was stained with blood, and a deep wound along his right flank leaked freely with every breath. Time was running out. Nathan drew in a steadying breath, then unleashed his flash body technique. His form blurred, and in the blink of an eye he closed the distance between them. As the Iwagakure Chunin whirled to intercept him, 3 razor-sharp shuriken flew from Nathan's hand. They found their mark in the Chunin's back, dropping the assailant to his knees. The sudden strike bought Shizuko the precious seconds he needed to right himself, pain flaring in his side, but resolve hardening in his eyes. Together, they would turn the tide of this battle. The Iwagakure Chunin was as vigilant as any warrior on the battlefield. Even as Nathan launched his surprise strike, the shinobi had anticipated the attack and deliberately held back a portion of his strength. The instant he sensed Nathan's chakra surge, he twisted aside and slipped out of range. Seizing the opening, Nathan darted forward, placing himself squarely between the Chunin and Mizutani Shizuko. "Shizuko," he said, his voice steady as he crouched protectively in front of her. Shizuko's eyes brimmed with tears, tears of relief more than fear. For the first time in what felt like ages, she allowed herself to believe they might make it through this alive. Scenes of Nathan swarmed by 100 stinging chakra bees had haunted her every moment until now. Seeing him emerge unscathed, ready to defend her, eased the tight knot in her chest. Nathan met her gaze and offered a small, reassuring smile. "Rest and recover," he told her quietly. "I've got him." Without waiting for her to respond, he sprang to his feet and charged straight at the Iwagakure Chunin, determination flashing in his eyes. Although Nathan was only a genin, Chunin Shi Songjian refused to let his guard drop. He'd already realized that Nathan was the one Jonin Akagi had targeted moments before. Now that Nathan had reappeared on the battlefield, Akagi's fate hung in the balance, and Songjian couldn't ignore it. In an instant, steel met steel. Nathan lunged with his short sword. Songjian countered with a kunai. The 2 blades collided in a shower of sparks and a screeching ring of metal. Locked in a deadlock, Nathan quickly reset his stance. He knew he couldn't overpower this seasoned Chunin by strength alone, so he flowed into the Konoha-style sword technique. But Songjian was no pushover. His missions alongside veteran squads had honed both his power and his reflexes. With every swift slash from Nathan, Songjian held firm, parrying blow after blow. The clash of steel, cling, cling, lang, echoed across the clearing as Nathan's lightning-fast, precise strikes kept Songjian driven onto the defensive. Neither combatant would yield an inch, and the outcome of their duel would decide more than just pride. Nathan didn't bother with ninjutsu. There was simply no need. Against the steady rain of his sword strikes, any ninja technique would have been redundant. One clean blow was enough to decide this fight. For nearly 3 minutes, his blade hovered and fell with unerring precision, probing Shi Songjian's defenses until finally they began to buckle. Seizing the opening, Nathan's sword flashed in a single arc, slicing a deep chunk of flesh from Shi Songjian's left shoulder. The older man staggered back, sweat beading on his forehead as pain coursed through him. But Nathan pressed on without slowing. 2 minutes later, he drove the point of his sword straight through Shi Songjian's chest. The man's eyes widened in shock. Regret flickered across his face, even as he crumpled to his knees and then collapsed to the ground. Nathan withdrew his blade, flicked away the blood with a practiced motion, and turned away from the fallen ninja. He walked steadily toward Mizutani Shizuko, who had been watching the duel with mounting concern. "Nathan," she called, hurrying forward. "Are you all right?" He shook his head as if to clear the fog of battle. "I'm fine." Her eyes followed his gaze to Shi Songjian's prone form. A dark stain spread across the man's robes, a grim certainty that the wound he'd suffered was mortal. Shizuko let out a slow breath, relief and sorrow mingling on her face, while Nathan simply stood silent, sword still in hand, ready for whatever came next. Nathan swept his gaze over the clearing, and finding no immediate threat, turned to Shizuko. "Shizuko, come here. I'll take care of your wound first." He led her to the massive oak at the edge of the glade. Shizuko followed wordlessly and settled against the tree's broad trunk. Nathan pressed his hands together in the precise sequence of seals he had just mastered. A soft emerald glow bloomed between his palms. With measured care, he laid his hand on the bruised flesh at Shizuko's side. Warmth radiated from his palm, and Shizuko closed her eyes, a contented hum escaping her lips. She felt the tension in her muscles ebb away, and a faint blush colored her cheeks as she avoided Nathan's gaze. Nathan remained expressionless, wholly absorbed in channeling his chakra. This was the first time he had applied the new healing technique on a human patient. Until now, he'd only practiced on small animals, where mistakes were inconsequential and proficiency was all that mattered. But treating a person was different. His only concern now was ensuring Shizuko's wound healed properly. After all, medical ninjutsu wasn't about flashy displays or sheer power. It was about life and trust. Moments later, the green glow faded, and Nathan gently withdrew his hand. Shizuko opened her eyes, the pain gone, and her breathing even. She offered him a grateful smile, and for the first time in a tense day, Nathan allowed himself a small, relieved nod. The healing was a success. Nathan finished sealing the last of the wound and eased his chakra back into readiness. In medical ninjutsu, the real work begins only after the overture. Now he had to monitor every fluctuation in the patient's cells, coaxing each tissue to regenerate correctly. It was painstaking, delicate work, and he was utterly absorbed. He didn't notice the shadow detach itself from the corridor walls until Mizutani Shizuko's panicked shout reached his ear. "Nathan, watch out!" Before he could spin, a hot slash seared across his right cheek. He felt metal bite into flesh, then someone's weight press against him. When he finally looked up, he saw, in horror, the kunai buried at Shizuko's throat. Time fractured around him. Shizuko's eyes widened in disbelief. Her hands flew to her neck as blood blossomed between her fingers. Nathan's heart slammed against his ribs, every instinct screaming to save her. But hey, her knees buckled and she collapsed, crimson staining the floor at their feet. Shock pinned him for a heartbeat. Then rage, bright, unforgiving, surged through him. He recalled the pain of learning about Ryosuke and Furukawa's deaths from afar, the hollow regret that followed. This time, he would not be powerless. Clenching his fists, Nathan vowed that whoever had done this would pay dearly. Nathan's heart thundered in his chest. Shizuko Mizutani had fallen before him, sacrificing herself to save his life, and no one could stay calm after witnessing such a selfless act. The assailant's strike had been impossibly fast. If Shizuko hadn't yanked him out of the way at the last second, he would already be dead. True, the enemy had taken advantage of his momentary distraction while he treated Shizuko's wounds, but that only made his debt all the more real. He swore he would repay her with everything he had left. Chapter 67. Hatred. A whirlwind of thoughts tore through Nathan's mind. He sensed a movement behind him just in time to see a kunai gleaming in the dim light, its blade arcing toward his neck in a deadly backhand strike. Under normal circumstances, there was no way he could dodge in time. But Nathan didn't hesitate. He stopped evading and activated his Sharingan. The moment the crimson eyes opened, everything around him seemed to crawl at a tortoise's pace. Nathan's instincts flared. He snapped his head back to avoid the blade, then drove both feet hard against the ground, propelling himself clear of danger. Only then did he catch a proper glimpse of his attacker. The young man stood about 20 years old, clad in the gray-green flak jacket and black garb of an Iwagakure jonin. His brow was furrowed in confusion, clearly surprised that Nathan had anticipated and evaded the strike. But as he met Nathan's unwavering gaze, he spotted the 3-tomo Sharingan swirling in those eyes. The confusion in his features hardened into cold, unmasked loathing. That hatred was not aimed at Nathan personally, but at his eyes. In that instant, Ohara Hideji's mind flashed back to the insults he'd endured as a genin, taunts and jeers hurled at him by peers who feared and reviled his own clan's bloodline. He remembered the sting of ridicule whenever a rival spotted his flair for Earth-style techniques. And now, confronted with someone bearing the legendary Uchiha dojutsu, his old wounds bled anew. Stand by one another, or die alone. Nathan steadied himself, meeting Hideji's glare without flinching. The air between them crackled with unspoken challenge, a silent vow that today's clash would be fought not only with blades and chakra, but also with the weight of every grudge and scar they carried within. Nathan had never forgotten the day he and his sensei's squad ran into that Uchiha with his Sharingan gleaming. The enemy's power was overwhelming. He toyed with Nathan's teacher and comrades like a cat playing with mice. Frozen by terror, Nathan couldn't lift a finger to help. He only watched in horror as the Uchiha danced between them, striking at will. In the end, the Uchiha spared Nathan, not out of mercy, but contempt. Killing such a coward would have sullied his record. He let Nathan go, simply because he found him beneath notice. From that moment on, guilt consumed Nathan. Even after he rose to the rank of Jonin, he could not forgive himself for his inaction. He longed for a chance to face that Uchiha one-on-one. Victory or defeat, at least it would settle his torment. But the ninja had since been killed by someone else, leaving Nathan with no opportunity for revenge. His frustration turned to obsession, and he vowed to make every living Uchiha pay for his shame. Today was no exception. Nathan had just dispatched a lone Uchiha challenger, his blade leaving nothing but dust on the battlefield. Yet victory brought no relief. The defeated ninja's eyes suddenly glowed in the underbrush. With a silent mutter of hand seals, he melted into camouflage, closing the distance between them. Unseen, he crept in behind Nathan, poised to end him with a single vengeful strike. Nathan not only failed, he unwittingly triggered his opponent's Sharingan. From Hideji Ohara's point of view, Nathan must have unlocked the dojutsu under the shock of losing his comrades. After all, the triggers for awakening a Sharingan aren't exactly classified information among the ninja world's top brass. Thanks to records dating back to the Warring States period and the three great ninja wars, anyone who bothered to piece together the data could spot a pattern. Even if the specifics remained hazy, it was clear enough that the trauma of watching friends die could spark an awakening. As a veteran shinobi with a near-obsessive fascination for the Uchiha, Hideji Ohara had collected every scrap of such intel. And so he was absolutely certain that he'd unknowingly given Nathan the push he needed, an idea that rankled him to his core. After all, what could be more distasteful than helping your enemy grow stronger? Nathan, however, was completely unaware of Hideji's personal grudge against the Uchiha, and frankly, he didn't care what the other man thought. Nathan's mind was consumed by a single burning thought. He had to kill his opponent. Only in death could his rage be sated. As for revealing his Sharingan, that risk no longer mattered. He'd concealed it only as a last resort, to save his life in a true emergency. In the heat of battle, though, holding back that trump card would have been suicide. With a swift motion, Nathan unleashed a barrage of shuriken aimed straight for Hideji Ohara's vital points. Hideji blurred, evading the deadly blades by inches, and countered instantly. Kunai materialized in his hand, each one intercepting a spinning shuriken. Sparks flew as metal clashed on metal. Seizing the momentary opening, Nathan bounded backward, distancing himself from Hideji. As he landed, he began tracing hand seals, his eyes alight with the crimson glow of the Sharingan. The faintest ripple in the air hinted at an impending genjutsu. Hideji's gaze snapped to Nathan's forming seals. With a sharp exhalation, he hurled his kunai toward Nathan's heart. The blade whistled through the air. Nathan twisted aside, the metal slicing mere inches from his shoulder. Instantly, he dispelled the burgeoning illusion. Chakra still pulsing through his veins, Nathan steadied himself, readying for the next exchange. The duel had only just begun. Nathan had tried to catch his opponent by surprise, but the instant Hideji glanced away, Nathan knew the man recognized and could evade the Sharingan's illusions. There was no point in forcing the technique any further. All it would do was reveal its limitations. He allowed the jutsu to fade from view. He was right. The level 2 magic jail hang technique simply couldn't keep up with Hideji's speed. He'd felt the same way facing Akagi under the Queen Bee's will. Even when Akagi's mind was not his own, Nathan still had to wait for the perfect opening to cast that spell. Against Akagi himself, he doubted he'd ever find such an opportunity. In the end, the level 2 magic jail hang was just too slow. If you didn't apply it at exactly the right moment, you lost your chance entirely. Nathan vowed he'd upgrade the magic jail hang technique as soon as he could, but for now, he needed to adapt. His hands moved in a blur. Shuriken, silent steel stars, whistled through the air. Some flew to block Hideji's spaces of evasion. Others aimed straight for vital points. Each projectile tested his opponent's reactions, probing for the slightest opening. Nathan watched every flinch, every shift of weight, ready to exploit any weakness he could find. Nathan combined his level 4 ninja tool throwing with the Sharingan's insight and unleashed a volley of shuriken at Ohara Hideji. Startled, Hideji instinctively raised his kunai to block the incoming steel. Seizing that moment, Nathan lifted his hand as if preparing a sealing jutsu, and Hideji, wary of his famed illusions, hastily looked away. But Nathan had no illusions in mind. In that same heartbeat, he unleashed his signature ninjutsu. Fire style, Phoenix Fire technique. In barely over a second, a cascade of fiery spheres, like blazing phoenix eggs, erupted from his fingertips and hurtled toward Heiji. Boom! 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 Explosions rocked the clearing, showering sparks and ash in all directions. Hideji's form flickered as he adeptly slipped each blazing orb. His reaction speed was stunning, so fast that even through the Sharingan, Nathan couldn't predict where he'd land. And Hideji wasn't content merely to evade. Drawing on his extensive combat experience, he twisted mid-dodge and surged forward, closing the distance between them. Nathan finished his ninjutsu just as Hideji Ohara sprang forward, gripping a kunai blade backward and aiming a slash straight for his throat. Instinctively, Nathan backed up, widening the gap between them and narrowly escaping the attack. Undeterred, Ohara immediately shifted direction and thrust the kunai toward Nathan's right neck. The two were almost on top of each other. Nathan didn't have time to draw his sword, so he stumbled back again. Thanks to the sharp clarity of his Sharingan, he twisted free at the last possible moment. Ohara pressed his advantage without pause, launching a third, lightning-fast strike. Breathless, and with barely an instant to react, Nathan dodged once more. At such close quarters, they were locked in a relentless, life-or-death duel. Each attack met with equal speed and precision, neither combatant willing to yield. Chapter 68, Sudden Halt. Nathan slipped aside just in time, narrowly avoiding the next flurry of strikes. With a quick twist of his wrist, he drew a kunai from his ninja pouch and met Obara Shuji blade to blade. The metal rang out in sharp cling-cling notes. Despite Nathan's efforts, Shuji's superior combat experience soon became clear. Within moments, Nathan's arms bore several new, stinging cuts. Grimacing, Nathan forced Shuji's kunai aside with all his strength. He took a half step back, flung the kunai in his hand, and at the same time drew the small dagger at his belt, far more maneuverable in such close quarters. Shuji barely glanced back to dodge the thrown weapon. Then, flashing a disdainful smirk, he surged forward again. Clang! 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 The iron songs of their blades grew faster, more furious. Nathan had hoped that mastering the Leaf Village sword style would at least let him hold his own against an opponent of Shuji's caliber, if not defeat him outright. Yet after only 2 minutes of relentless skirmishing, he found himself bleeding, breathless, and slipping into a dangerous disadvantage. There's an old saying in Shinobi circles: an inch longer, an inch stronger, an inch shorter, an inch deadlier. Facing Obara Shuji, his short sword against my kunai, I should have been able to keep him at bay. Instead, every strike and parry he delivered revealed just how perilous even a moment's hesitation can be. In the cramped corridor, his offense and defense blended together seamlessly. At first I managed to stave him off, barely, but with each passing second, I felt myself sliding onto the back foot. I've faced opponents whose skill made me reel, like my old training sessions with Furukawa, but those were drills. There was no real danger, just the pressure of falling short. This was different. This was life or death. I've heard whispers that Obara Shuji's close-quarters combat might even eclipse Furukawa's legendary prowess. Watching him now, it's hard to argue otherwise. His blade dance was precise, his reflexes uncanny. He'd fought Uchiha before, and knew well how to neutralize the Sharingan's edge. Countless times I tried to seize the initiative with my Manjikyo, but each attempt crumbled under his counterattacks. My vision blurred with effort as his sword lunged in, nearly catching me off guard more than once. It was the true measure of a jonin. Not raw power or flashy techniques, but the ability to flow through combat so naturally that every riposte felt inevitable. I clenched my jaw, cradling my aching arm. If I had any chance of turning this around, I'd have to find a weakness in his rhythm, and fast. Because right now, every inch beneath his blade felt like a step toward my own undoing. Nathan's eyes flickered with sudden clarity. In his effort to conceal the Sharingan, he had grown painfully unfamiliar with its nuances. He didn't even grasp half the techniques it offered. Against wide-eyed Chunin, his raw talent had carried him through. But facing a seasoned Jonin, he felt toothless, his best tricks falling short. Only practice could forge real skill, he reminded himself. That realization both stung and inspired him. This fight had laid bare his weaknesses and pointed the way forward. He would no longer waste his energy plotting revenge. He simply wasn't strong enough yet. Instead, he vowed to absorb every lesson his opponent could teach, to deepen his mastery of the Konoha sword style, to hone the Sharingan until its power felt second nature. Once his strength matched his ambition, then he would seek justice. For now, Nathan knew patience and persistence were his greatest weapons. As he settled into that resolve, crisp whistles cut through the air, echoing from the stands. The signal rang loud and clear. The mission was complete. Nathan jolted awake at the shrill blast of the whistle, and in that instant, he knew exactly what to do. Ignoring the pain of his fresh wound, he shoved past Obara Shuji and sprang back to create distance. Then, with a whisper of chakra, he activated his instant technique and Ryapi, Ard at the side of the nearest Konoha Jonin. As Nathan materialized, hidden shinobi from the Leaf Village surged forward, each converging on their veteran commanders. The ambush was perfectly timed. Before the Iwa forces could mount a proper defense, they found themselves outflanked and outnumbered by elite ninja under Jonin leadership. Obara Shuji and the surrounding rock shinobi scrambled to intervene, but the Konoha assault was already in full swing. A handful of Iwa tries to hold the line, but against coordinated strikes from seasoned Jonin, their resistance collapsed in minutes. At the rear, Commander Huangtu watched his men falter, desperately rallying his troops to slow Konoha's advance. By the time he managed to reorganize his unit, the Leaf ninjas had vanished. The clearing was empty, save for a few groaning Iwa soldiers picking themselves up from the dirt. Huangtu studied the tracks leading away, straight toward the evacuation route. It all made sense now. Konoha's attack had been a feint, designed solely to draw out and distract Iwa reinforcements. With Nathan and the other Leaf shinobi safely withdrawn, their true objective, blocking the path and securing their own retreat, had been flawlessly executed. As dawn broke over the battlefield, Commander Huangtu permitted himself a grim nod. The enemy had achieved exactly what it intended, and now, with the route clear, there was nothing left to do but prepare for the next encounter. Huangtu realized it was too late to mount a support operation, so he ordered his troops simply to keep up the chase. Not long after, they spotted another group moving ahead of Konoha's main contingent. It turned out to be the handful of Konoha shinobi who'd survived the River Valley clash, a welcome reinforcements that bolstered their numbers and lifted their spirits. Huangtu, wary of rushing in and walking into an ambush, held his forces at a cautious distance. Still, he couldn't afford to break off pursuit. This was Iwagakure's territory, and even a lucky gift from the enemy wasn't one they could let slip through their fingers. Reluctantly, both sides tacitly agreed to maintain a steady advance, gradually moving out of the River Valley corridor. About an hour and a half later, Huangtu's column linked up with the three squads that had led the initial attack. Another 30 minutes on, the blocking unit joined them. Reinforcements that sealed the trap. Faced with overwhelming numbers and no clear way to slip away, the Iwagakure shinobi finally abandoned any hope of halting Konoha's escape. Nathan and the others had no choice but to acknowledge their defeat in that skirmish. Their adversaries shadowed them at a safe distance, forced to concede the field, but unwilling to let them go unchallenged. Nathan knew better than to linger in enemy territory. One wrong move and they'd be surrounded. Within minutes, they'd slipped out of the Yanyin village occupied zone and were on the move again. By dawn the next day, after more than 10 hours of relentless marching, Nathan and his team finally crossed back into friendly lines. The first stronghold they reached, closest to the Land of Stone, was a grim tableau. Hundreds of Konoha shinobi lay strewn across the courtyard, wounded and bloodied. Mednin bustled among them, administering aid with practiced urgency. Nathan surveyed the survivors at his feet. Only half of their original number remained fit to stand. A cold realization settled over him. This brutal attrition was precisely why the Great Ninja War couldn't drag on for long. With casualty rates like these, even a single battle could decimate an entire unit. Thank heaven there weren't more engagements of this scale, otherwise their forces would have been wiped out entirely. Nathan shook his head, pushed the thought aside, and began weaving the healing technique to mend his injuries. As the soothing flow of chakra closed his wounds, he mapped out his next steps. First, he'd scale back on the mirror heart technique. Since his Sharingan was already exposed, there was no reason to keep hiding it. He could leave it active for longer stretches, using idle moments to sharpen its power and at the same time conserve chakra. Those saved reserves would go straight into improving his Magic Jag Hang technique. Second, his Konoha-style swordsmanship still needed work. He had no intention of feeling helpless under some overwhelming skill again. And finally, there was the matter of fully mastering his Sharingan's potential. Nathan paused a moment, then murmured to himself, I really need to contact the clan leaders as soon as possible. He would start with the Uchiha hierarchy. Sure, he could puzzle things out on his own, but why waste time reinventing a wheel honed by 1,000 years of tradition? When the time comes, Nathan will have to speak up. I'm confident that once the clan learns he's awakened the Sharingan, they won't hesitate to share every piece of their knowledge with him. Chapter 69. Practice inside the Uchiha clan's tent. A veteran jonin with the 3 Magatama Sharingan fixed Nathan with a calm, assessing gaze. Nathan, he asked softly, are you sure you don't want to join the clan's combat squad? Nathan swallowed hard. He forced a weary nod, letting just a trace of pain linger in his eyes, enough to sell the story that his Sharingan had awakened after witnessing the deaths of his comrades. He couldn't risk appearing too composed. The jonin studied him for a long moment, then sighed. All right. He reached into his robe and withdrew a sealed scroll. This contains advanced Sharingan techniques. You should take the time to master them. With a fluid motion, he tossed the scroll to Nathan. Nathan caught it, surprised by how readily it was offered. He'd never asked the clan for anything special, yet within 2 days of his return, before he'd even officially reported his eyes awakening, the clan had dispatched this jonin to verify it and present him with prized training materials. Clearly, they valued the Sharingan far more than he'd realized. Nathan glanced down at the seal, determination sparking in his gaze. He would learn every technique in that scroll, whatever it took. The morning after Nathan's Sharingan first flared to life, 2 scrolls arrived for him, one official dispatch from the clan and a second, more personal missive. A small Uchiha task force had been assigned to watch over every fresh Sharingan user, ensuring their safety in these turbulent times. Nathan, for all his reticence, had to admit the clan had looked out for him. They'd covered his living expenses after his adoptive parents fell in battle, and the very moment his eyes awakened, they'd sent healers and caretakers to see to him. Yet, Nathan carried secrets too dangerous to entrust to countless eager eyes. He politely declined the clan's protective detail, knowing that too much attention could expose him and kill him before the war was over. Shoving those worries to the back of his mind, he reached out and snatched up the thicker of the 2 scrolls as the Uchiha jonin tossed it toward him. But before he could unroll it, the jonin produced the slimmer parchment in his other hand, flicked it to life, and fixed Nathan with a sharp gaze. I hear you're skilled with the blade, he said. This is the Uchiha clan's swordsmanship, the jonin announced, setting a scroll into Nathan's hands. Nathan's eyes lit up. He carefully unrolled the parchment and murmured, Uchiha-style swordsmanship. Exactly, the jonin said proudly. This technique is unique to our clan. When it's combined with the Sharingan, its power reaches its peak. Thank you, uncle, Nathan replied sincerely. The jonin nodded in approval. Train hard and don't disgrace the Uchiha name. As he turned to leave, he paused and looked back. One more thing. 2 months from now, the clan will register you for the Chunin exam. Be ready. Nathan straightened and bowed. I understand, Uncle. Good. With that, the Uchiha Jonin walked off, leaving Nathan alone with the scroll, his first step on the path to proving himself. Nathan watched his teammates disappearing backs and murmured to himself, so the biannual Chunin exams are upon us again. He paused, recalling the two comrades and their sensei who once stood by his side. A heavy sigh escaped him. Now I'm the only one left in Class 17. For a moment, loneliness crept in, but Nathan pushed it aside. There was no time for regrets. He'd gained new power, and now he intended to master it. Each day he had 5,500 chakra points to work with. He divided them meticulously. 3,400 points went straight into refining his reflecting heart technique. With every training session, his proficiency rose by 20 points, and his Sharingan's evolution advanced by 4. 900 points he spent on maintaining his Sharingan for up to 15 hours a day, a regimen that added another 3 evolution points. Of the remaining 1,200 points, 400 fueled intense taijutsu drills to sharpen his reflexes. 400 were dedicated to genjutsu exercises, strengthening his illusionary defenses. And the last 400 were set aside for meditation and chakra recovery, ensuring he retained enough reserves for unexpected battles. Day after day, Nathan pushed his body and mind to the limit. Morning after morning, he'd awaken with a single thought: evolve. By the time spring gave way to summer, he resolved he would be ready. Ready not only for the exams, but also for whatever fate had in store for the lone shinobi of Class 17. Nathan allocated the remaining 1,200 chakra points in 3 parts. 1,000 went straight into honing his fire release, Phoenix Immortal Flame technique, and his magic, Shaohong art, boosting each by 6 mastery levels. The final 200 points he spread across lower-cost skills, Konoha-style swordsmanship, Uchiha-style swordsmanship, and ninja tool throwing. He also reserved time to meditate on the Sharingan's secrets during his off-duty hours. Outside of missions, every moment was either spent training or traveling to the training grounds. Each day was meticulously scheduled, and Nathan found his life more rewarding than ever. 2 months slipped by in the blink of an eye. Just as he predicted, Yanyan Village had seen its incident rate plummet after closing its logistics hub, so his missions remained simple. With no major emergencies to derail him, his practice plan proceeded smoothly. This evening, like every other, Nathan settled into a quiet corner and began the art of reflecting the heart on himself. Once, twice, 3 times, letting the moonlight guide his meditative focus. It was only on his 11th repetition that a strange thrill coursed through Nathan, and in an instant his grasp of the heart-reflecting technique surged to a new height. He knew without question that he'd just broken through. A moment later, he opened his eyes and whispered, "Panel." In the next heartbeat, that familiar veil of pale blue light shimmered into existence before him. Nathan Uchi 11, Attributes, Constitution 8, Spirit 9, Chakra 2,105, 6,102, 6,109, Bloodline, Sharingan Single Magatama 715,000, up from 317 to 1,000, Techniques and Skills, Chakra Refining Technique. Level 4, 415, 2,000, Firestyle Great Fireball Technique. Level 2, 55,500, Firestyle House of Immortals Fire Technique. Level 3, 612,000, Firestyle Dragon Fire Technique. Level 2, 25,500, Telekinesis Technique. Level 3, 460,000, Shadow Clone Technique. 0, 5,100s Healing Technique. 1, 6,200, Magic Shackle Technique. Level 2, 371,500, Illusion Sharingan. Level 1, 150,200, Reflection of the Heart. Level 5, 15,000, up from Level 4, 946, 2,000, Konoha Style Swordsmanship. Level 4, 315, 2,000, up from Level 615, 1,000, Uchiha Style Swordsmanship. Level 3, 501,000, Ninja Tool Throwing. Level 4, 350, 2,000, Chakra Control. Level 3, 210, 1,000, 3 Body Technique. Level 3. Nathan scrolled past the other entries and paused on Reflection of the Heart. As he'd hoped, it had advanced from Level 4, under 46, 2,000, to Level 5, 1,500, a small but significant milestone on his journey. If Nathan had stuck to his original training schedule, his Reflection Heart technique would have broken through almost 2 weeks ago. But after he revealed his Sharingan, he reallocated his chakra, scaling back his investment in the reflection heart technique, which stretched the breakthrough to 2 months. Surprisingly, this shift didn't slow his Sharingan's growth. It actually accelerated it. Once activated, the Sharingan requires less chakra to generate greater evolutionary gains, so the net effect remains strongly positive. Now, his progress monitor reads 715 out of 1,000, well over 2/3 complete. The next leap forward hinges on the effectiveness of the level 5 reflection heart technique. If it performs as expected, it won't be long before his Sharingan evolves to the twin Magatama stage. Chapter 70. Preparing to return to the village. Nathan shook himself from deep thought and turned to review his newly acquired skills. The first was illusion, Sharingan, which he'd learned from the ancient scroll while studying the Sharingan's capabilities. Despite its name, it wasn't a mundane trick of light and shadow, but a highly refined hypnotic technique. According to the scroll, a master of this art could cast the illusion without hand seals, ensnaring a target with a single, penetrating gaze. What's more, the caster could construct an entire sensory environment, ideal for psychological warfare, interrogation, or disorienting an opponent in direct combat. Determined to unlock its full potential, Nathan devoted hours of practice to raising it to rank 1, 150-200. At this level, he could initiate the illusion in under half a second, though its strength was still modest, only slightly more potent than his basic Sharingan-driven hypnotism. Anyone versed in illusionary techniques, skilled at dispelling them, or possessing strong mental resilience could still resist and break free. His second new ability, Uchiha-style swordsmanship, awaited further study. For now, Nathan cataloged his progress and prepared to hone both skills on his journey back to the village. Nathan weighed his options. He could invest extra time setting up a richer, more immersive illusion, one that would be far harder for an opponent to tear apart. In practice, the illusion Sharingan had 2 modes of use. The first was quick and simple, but produced only a modest effect. The second was painstaking and slow, yet conjured a nearly unbreakable mirage. Nathan could switch between them as needed, but given his current skill level, he knew he couldn't perform the advanced method fast enough in the midst of battle. Frustrated but undeterred, he settled on a different solution. He would unleash the magic Sharingan. Its power far surpassed that of the level 1 illusion Sharingan. Even the basic illusion technique still had value, enough to disrupt an enemy's focus, and when paired with Uchiha-style swordsmanship, the combination could prove devastating. A well-timed illusion could leave an opponent vulnerable to a blade strike, achieving an effect far greater than the sum of its parts. Glancing at his progress panel, Nathan noted his rapid advancement in Uchiha-style kenjutsu. His background in Konoha-style swordsmanship had given him a solid foundation, allowing him to assimilate the Uchiha techniques at an impressive pace. With the magic Sharingan at the ready and his sword skills honed, he felt confident he could turn the tide of any confrontation. After just 2 months of training, Nathan's Uchiha-style swordsmanship has already risen to level 3, 510,000, nearly the same point he reached in Konoha-style swordsmanship 2 months ago. What makes this even more impressive is that he didn't spend those 8 weeks solely on the Uchiha techniques. He also dove deeply into advanced Konoha-style drills and honed his ninja tool, throwing skills. To match his earlier rate of progress in less time and with a broader curriculum is a testament to his dedication. In that same time frame, his Konoha-style swordsmanship has surged from level 3, 615,000, up to level 4, 352,000. If he were to face Ohara Hideji again in close combat, Nathan is now confident he wouldn't lose. It isn't a lack of skill that held him back before, but a shortage of real battle experience, and tight-range fighting depends heavily on that. At least now, Nathan can promise himself one thing: he won't be beaten. Now that Nathan had upgraded his Uchiha-style sword art to level 4, he was confident he could overwhelm Hideji in close-quarters combat. As for ranged attacks, even 2 months ago, he hadn't feared his opponent's ninja tools, and with 2 more months of practice behind him, his ninja tool throwing had improved from 52,000 to 352,000 experience at level 4. That only bolstered his confidence further. His ninjutsu, however, remained limited. He knew only the fire escape techniques, the stro, jest of which, fire escape Phoenix Flame technique, had climbed from 226 1000 to 6 and 12 1000 experience at level 3, but still hadn't broken through to level 4. By contrast, Ohara Hideji was a jonin. Hideji wielded at least 2 fully mastered ninjutsu, and by combining them, he could unleash attacks far beyond the reach of Nathan's single fire escape. On top of that, Hideji almost certainly knew indispensable support jutsu like the shadow clone technique, making him an even more daunting adversary. If Nathan hoped to match Hideji's versatility, he could rely only on his Sharingan's genjutsu powers, but to truly overpower a seasoned jonin, he'd need his Sharingan to evolve to the 2 Magatama stage. Until then, he would have to close the gap with sheer swordsmanship and sharpen every shuriken he carried, praying that his speed and precision would be enough to turn the tide. Nathan's heart raced as he skimmed over the other skills. Nothing else had changed. He closed the skill panel and prepared to test his newly upgraded level 5 reflection heart technique. Forming the familiar hand seals, he unleashed the jutsu on himself. Immediately, he noticed the difference. Before, this technique only generated a dribble of special chakra in his mind. Now, the flow was steady. Although the volume per moment wasn't huge, its sustained release meant that, once it pooled in his eyes, the effect was significantly amplified. Confident he could push his Sharingan further, Nathan sealed and cast the technique a second time. 2 minutes later, he opened his eyes, and then his skill panel. Sure enough, his Sharingan had edged up a little in its evolution. Even better, he'd expended just 340 chakra over those 2 casts, remarkably close to the 300 chakra it normally took to activate the Sharingan in the first place. Nathan ran through the numbers in his head one more time. If he kept to his current training schedule and maintained his daily chakra allocations, he would gain 13 Sharingan evolution points each day. At that rate, he'd go from 715 out of 1,000 points to a full 1,000 in just over 20 days, far faster than he'd anticipated. No wonder level 5 evolution demanded a hefty 2,000 proficiency points. The payoff was enormous. He shivered at the thought of level 6, though. 5,000 points. There was no way he could reach that threshold quickly. Still, curiosity got the better of him. How powerful was the level 6 reflection heart technique? Really? Nathan's lips curled into an eager smile, but he forced himself to close the proficiency panel. He glanced at his watch. 20 days until the Chunin exams. In truth, his current strength would make the exam little more than a formality. Whether his Sharingan finished evolving before then or not made no difference. He would breeze through regardless. With that settled, Nathan turned back to his training. There was work to be done, and he'd wasted enough time daydreaming. Nathan looked up at the dusk sky and realized how time had slipped away, a whole week gone in the blink of an eye. That afternoon, he'd returned to the base camp after finishing the last patrol mission. By his superior's orders, he and a team of Genin would head back to the village tomorrow to begin preparations for the Chunin exams, which would take place in 2 weeks. That night, in the quiet of his tent, Nathan packed away his gear and completed his routine training drills. Before climbing into his sleeping bag, he opened the floating holo panel that tracked his progress. After 7 days of unrelenting effort, the evolution meter for his Sharingan now read 807 1000, just shy of unlocking the second Magatama. At the same time, his magic Jaghang Jutsu had edged up from level 2, 371 500, to level 2, 412 500, and his illusion, Sharingan technique had grown from level 1, 150 200, to level 1, 191 200. Seeing those numbers climb gave Nathan a deep sense of satisfaction. Without concrete proof of advancement, it was all too easy for even the most disciplined shinobi to grow complacent. But as long as that proficiency panel hovered before him, each increase a testament to his hard work, there was no excuse to let up. Smiling to himself, Nathan closed the display, extinguished the lantern, and settled in for a well-earned rest. Chapter 71, Depression. Early the next morning, Nathan led a dozen genin down the road toward the Hidden Leaf village, flanked by a Jonin squad and a Chunin unit. Along the journey, the younger shinobi couldn't help but steal glances at him. His Sharingan remained active and impossible to hide. Nathan paid them no mind. With his trump card already exposed, he had no choice but to hone his strength and deepen his control over his eyes. Any idle curiosity from bystanders was of no consequence. He moved with an almost effortless calm that only fueled whispers among the escort. Some suspected he was deliberately showing off. Yet after all they'd endured on the battlefield, no one dared confront him. Nathan, for his part, had neither the time nor the inclination for small talk. 2 quiet days passed under this tense peace. That night, Nathan finished his usual Genjutsu Sharingan training when a sudden flash of insight struck him. He paused mid-flow, opening his skill panel. Sure enough, his Sharingan had leveled up. From level 1, 191-200, just 2 days ago, to level 2, 1,500 now. Eager to test the upgrade, Nathan activated his Genjutsu Sharingan again. He noted immediately that the sealing technique was about 20% faster, and its effect felt noticeably stronger. Though the improvement wasn't dramatic, any edge in these wartime conditions was welcome. Satisfied, he returned to his training, pushing through the hours until late into the night. At last, he called it quits and lay down to rest, albeit lightly. In the middle of a war, one could never be fully off guard against enemy ninjas lying in wait. Nathan's half-awake vigilance made his rest less than perfect, but he'd grown accustomed to it. A few nights like this wouldn't shatter his focus. Dawn arrived with quiet stillness. After a simple breakfast, Nathan and his squad broke camp and resumed their journey, each step carrying them deeper into unknown danger. Nathan traveled by day and trained his Sharingan by night. 5 days later, he arrived back in Konoha village. According to his records, his Sharingan's evolution meter now read 872 out of 1,000, and his proficiency with the magic jag hang technique had climbed to level 2, sitting at 442 out of 500. Despite his worry about possible ambushes on the way, nothing happened. After bidding farewell to the squad leader, Nathan walked the familiar path home. The small cottage he'd left months ago was buried under a layer of dust. No one had set foot inside all that time. He spent the better part of an hour cleaning from top to bottom, sweeping out cobwebs and polishing the wooden floors until they gleamed. Exhaustion finally caught up with him. Months of life on the battlefield had taken their toll, always on guard for surprise attacks, never sleeping more than a few fitful hours in the base camp. Now that he was back in the relative safety of the village, Nathan decided to put off training for a while. First, he would rest. He collapsed onto his futon and slept, truly slept, for an entire day. When he finally woke, the weight of his fatigue had lifted, if only a little. Refreshed, he felt ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. When Nathan woke, a deep comfort washed over him. The fatigue he'd carried for as long as he could remember was gone, replaced by an unexpected surge of energy. "Ah, so good," he murmured, stretching luxuriously. A soft rumble in his stomach reminded him of breakfast. Nathan sat up, patted his belly, grabbed his wallet from the nightstand, and stepped outside. The moment he reached the main street of Konoha, he felt the change. Only 6 months had passed since the last Chunin exams, yet the village's usually bustling lanes now seemed subdued. Faces in the crowd wore worry like a second skin. He recalled how new shops had been springing up back then. Ramen stalls, tinkerers' workshops, even a little bookstore. Today, the windows were plastered with for sale notices. Those few businesses still open stood half-empty, waiting in vain for customers. Of course, the absence of so many nine-jaw shoppers was part of the problem. Though civilians made up most of Konoha's population, it was the shinobi, flush with mission stipends and bonuses, who truly kept commerce alive. With so many warriors deployed to the front lines, local demand had collapsed. Add to that the growing turmoil in the wider ninja world, which had driven transportation costs through the roof and sent prices here soaring. A stagnant marketplace was almost inevitable. Nathan shook his head as he passed an empty storefront, once occupied by a cheerful florist. If things didn't pick up soon, more livelihoods would vanish along with the shinobi returning from the battlefield. And that prospect put a knot in his stomach that no wallet, even a well-padded one, could fix. Nathan shook his head to himself and hurried off, sprinting purposefully down the street. Ahead, the warm glow of Ichiraku ramen caught his eye. Pushing open the Norin curtain, he stepped inside and spotted Chef Shuda in his crisp white coat, already smiling his greeting. "Hey there, Nathan. What'll it be today?" "Miso chashu ramen," Nathan replied without missing a beat. After months of bland rations, nothing sounded better than a bowl of indulgent noodles in rich miso broth. "Coming right up," Shuda said, turning to work his familiar magic. Within moments, a steaming bowl arrived, its glossy broth shimmering with flavor. Thick slices of tender pork rested atop perfectly cooked noodles, and the aroma alone was enough to make Nathan's mouth water. He bowed his thanks, then lifted the chopsticks and dove in. The first mouthful was heavenly. Each slurp of noodles was soaked in savory broth, every bite of pork melt in your mouth tender. Nathan ate with abandon, finishing the entire bowl in under 2 minutes. He rubbed his stomach, satisfied, but already craving more. "Would you like another?" Shuda asked, leaning on the counter. Nathan nodded eagerly. "Yes, please. One more bowl of miso chashu." Shuda laughed and disappeared into the kitchen. A few moments later, he reappeared with a second bowl just as sumptuous as the first. Steam curled invitingly from the broth, and Nathan prepared to indulge once more. Nathan polished off his bowl in no time, yet he still felt hungry. He waved to the boss. "One more bowl, please. Pork bone ramen this time." Bowl after bowl, Nathan worked his way through 10 servings until a small mountain of empty dishes crowded the table. He leaned back with a satisfied belch and rubbed his bulging stomach. "How much do I owe you?" 875 taels. "Thank you for your patronage," the boss replied, a twinkle in his eye. Nathan did a quick mental tally, no price hike, and calmly counted out the coins. With the boss's warm send-off, he stepped out of the ramen shop and onto the busy street. He had one more errand before heading home. Because his team leader had fallen in battle, Nathan needed to apply for the Chunin exam in person at the Hokage Tower. The process was straightforward. He filled out the form, signed his name, and handed it back. Now all that remained was a 10-day wait until the exam began. Nathan refused to let the next 10 days slip by. His magic jail hang technique was on the cusp of a breakthrough, and he was determined to push it to level 3 before the exam. It wasn't about outperforming the other candidates. He'd set this goal simply to keep himself focused. At the same time, his Uchiha-style swordsmanship had gone neglected during his recent travels. Over the coming days, he'd seize every spare moment to drill its forms, aiming to elevate it to level 4. He had a hunch that once he'd perfected both Konoha-style and Uchiha-style swordsmanship, he could blend their strengths into a unique, more powerful style, perhaps even inventing new techniques reminiscent of the legendary 3-day moon dance. With that plan in mind, Nathan headed home and immediately immersed himself in training. Chapter 72, Low-Key Cultivation. The days of training slipped by faster than Nathan expected. Before he knew it, the 10th evening had arrived, and he stood alone on the Uchiha clan's training grounds beneath a towering oak. His eyes were closed, body perfectly still in meditation. A sudden gust swept through the clearing, rattling branches overhead. Leaves rained down around him in a green storm. Nathan's concentration wavered only for an instant before he triggered his Sharingan, the crimson iris blossoming with that telltale spinning tomoe. With a quick mental tally, he mapped out the trajectory of every falling leaf. The hush was broken by the soft, metallic clang of Nathan drawing his short sword. In a blink, he stepped into motion. The blade flashed through the air in a series of precise, arcing strikes, each one cleaving a leaf in half. He danced lightly among the fragments, never letting even a single leaf brush his guard. In that confined space, he moved like water, graceful, disciplined, and lethal. At last, the wind died away and the oak stood still. Nathan's final cut split the last leaf and sent its halves drifting to the earth. He slid the sword back into its scabbard, exhaled calmly, and reopened his eyes, once again at peace under the ancient tree. Nathan stood perfectly still, eyes closed in focused concentration. After a long moment, he exhaled softly. So this is level 4 of Uchiha sword art. Over the past 10 days, Nathan had devoted every spare minute to perfecting this technique. To accelerate his progress, he'd even set aside his training in Konoha sword art and ninja tool throwing. Thanks to having already advanced Konoha sword art to level 4 beforehand, he could now concentrate fully on the Uchiha style, and that single-minded effort had paid off. He just unlocked Uchiha sword art at level 4, with the gauge standing at 1 out of 2,000 toward the next milestone. He couldn't help but admire the lineage of this technique. As the Uchiha clan's inherited blade art, it was designed to harmonize with the Sharingan, and at level 4 it truly came into its own. When paired with his awakened Sharingan, Uchiha sword art surpassed Konoha sword art at the same rank, unleashing speed and precision beyond ordinary kenjutsu. It wasn't that Konoha sword art lacked power, far from it, but the Uchiha style exploited the dojutsu's predictive edge so perfectly that no rival technique could match it. Unfortunately, most Uchiha shinobi leaned so heavily on their Sharingan's visual prowess that few ever bothered to study this blade form. Its potential remained hidden in the shadows of the clan's reputation, until now. Nathan's triumph at level 4 was as much a testament to his determination as it was a revival of a nearly forgotten art. Recalling memories from his past life, Nathan realized that in recent years only Uchiha Shisui had truly mastered that elusive body technique. By fusing it with potent genjutsu and near-instantaneous movement, Shisui earned the legendary moniker, Instant Body Shisui. Nathan murmured to himself, he'll be entering this Chunin exam too. Though Nathan devoted every waking moment to his own training and paid little mind to the world outside, he had caught whispers of the Uchiha prodigy's rise. At just 9 years old, Shisui had fast-tracked through the Ninja Academy in only 2 years, graduated early, and been dispatched straight to the battlefield, where within 3 months he awakened his Sharingan, complete with dual Magatama. The clan, eager to showcase their young genius, promptly recalled him to register for this exam. Thanks to Shisui's dazzling reputation, Nathan's own talents remained comfortably in the shadows. He didn't resent being overlooked. In fact, he almost wished he could vanish entirely, so he might pursue his cultivation in perfect peace. Nathan couldn't stay hidden for long, not with the Sharingan activated. As a member of the Uchiha clan, no matter how low-key he tried to be, people still noticed the faint scarlet glint in his eyes, and tonight that glint was about Twai, Odeepin. His Sharingan was on the verge of gaining its second Tomai. After days of relentless training, Nathan's evolution meter had climbed to 992 out of 1,000. All that remained was one more evening of his usual drills, and those final 8 points would trigger the upgrade. He knew exactly what would follow. As soon as the second Magatama appeared, whispers and stares would swarm him again. He briefly entertained the idea of delaying his breakthrough until after the Chunin exams, just to avoid the extra attention during the preliminary battles, but he quickly discarded the thought. This next stage of Sharingan evolution wasn't just a cosmetic change from 1 Tomoe to 2, it was a genuine amplification of his innate potential. When his eyes first awakened, his entire skill set had surged. Now, advancing to a 2 Tomo Sharingan would boost both his physique and his spirit. Those fundamental increases would raise his physical limits and in turn expand his chakra reserves and accelerate his recovery. Determined, Nathan set his jaw and headed for the training grounds. Tonight, he would finish what he'd started and step into a new echelon of power. Nathan knew that evolving his Sharingan now would speed up his mastery of other skills, something he certainly didn't want to delay. After all, this was only the leap from a single Tomoe to 2 Tomoe, not the fabled Mangekyo Sharingan, so there was nothing to hide. Besides, with Uchiha Shisui's reputation as a protective shield for the clan, and the fact that Shisui, 2 years his junior, had already awakened his own double Tomo Sharingan, Nathan assumed his own potential would pale in comparison. No one would waste their attention on him. Comforted by that thought, he packed his gear and hurried home. What he failed to realize was that once his Sharingan evolved to 2 Tomoe, the entire clan would be abuzz. Gaining a second Tomoe in just over 2 months of awakening was no small feat. Even if his baseline aptitude fell short of Shisui's, it would still mark Nathan as a rising talent, and inevitably draw focused attention. That night, within the Uchiha compound at Nathan's family home, he sat in his training chamber. His chakra fully replenished, he bypassed the reflection of the heart technique for the moment and turned instead to the genjutsu. hanging prison technique, just as he'd planned. Tonight, he would master one step before moving on to the next. After days of relentless practice, Nathan finally stood on the cusp of a breakthrough. Determined to push his magic jail hang technique to level 3, he swiftly wove the hand seals. Then, with a sudden click, his Sharingan snapped open. He fixed its crimson glare on the white rabbit he'd purchased for illusion training. The instant their eyes met, the rabbit froze in mid-step. Though its features remained impassive, Nathan could feel its terror in every tremor of its body as the technique bit into its mind. A moment later, the training interface chimed, Magic Jail Hang Technique Proficiency +1. Nathan relaxed the illusion and let the rabbit regain its senses. He paused only long enough to give it a chance to settle, then formed the seals again and unleashed the technique once more. This time, his movements were noticeably faster and more assured, proof that the extra proficiency had already taken hold. Nathan glanced at the panel, satisfaction settling in his chest. He knew he wasn't a natural prodigy. He couldn't grasp new ninjutsu at a single glance like some of his peers. But he also knew that every drop of sweat he shed in practice carried him forward. With each repetition, he grew stronger, inch by inch, toward mastering the art he sought. Nathan settled into his training with quiet confidence. He knew that, given enough time, no genius could outmatch him. Minutes blurred as he silently repeated the same incantation. On his fourth attempt at the magic jail hang technique, something clicked, his casting speed surged, and the illusory bindings tightened as never before. He paused to summon his status panel. Proficiency, level 3, to 1,000. A satisfied smile curved his lips. In just 10 days, he'd already conquered 2 of the goals he'd set for himself. Now only one challenge remained, evolving his Sharingan. With renewed determination, Nathan prepared to push himself even further. Chapter 73, Evolution. Nathan rubbed his aching shoulders and took a deep breath, steadying his racing heart. He settled onto the ground, closed his eyes, and began channeling the heart-reflecting technique. With each repetition, once, twice, 3 times, he felt a warm, pulsing chakra rise from the core of his mind, streaming down into his eyes. His pulse quickened. He knew in theory that his Sharingan was ready to evolve from a single Tomoe to 2, but facing the moment in practice stirred a surprising mix of anticipation and nerves. By the 6th activation, a dull ache throbbed behind his eyelids. He paused, gently pressing his fingertips to his brow to confirm there was no lasting damage. Satisfied, he rested for a few breaths until the pain subsided. Then, steeling himself, he resumed. 7th time, the ache returned, sharper this time, but rather than stopping, Nathan pushed on. He called upon the heart-reflecting technique for the 8th time. Instantly, a surge of chakra, unlike any before, flooded his mind and streamed through his optic nerves. Heat flared behind his eyes, and a brilliant crimson glow burst forth, drawing him into a silent trance. Then, as if sculpted from the light itself, a second Magatama formed on his iris, completing the pair. Nathan gasped, the world snapping back into focus with crystal clarity. He opened his eyes fully and watched the new Tomoe swirl in his vision. The air around him seemed to hum. His shoulders still ached, but his heart soared. His Sharingan had evolved, and with it, a new chapter of his path lay before him. Nathan's eyes snapped open as 2 swirling Tomoe blinked into existence in each scarlet iris. His Sharingan had unmistakably evolved from a single Tomoe to 2. He burst out of the house and swept his gaze across the yard, astonished by the sudden clarity. Before awakening the Sharingan, everything had looked fuzzy, like a low-resolution image, but after the first Tomoe, it felt like standard HD. Now, with 2 Tomo, the world had sharpened to crystal-clear, ultra-high definition. Even under the faintest moonlight, every shape and shadow stood out in razor-sharp relief. He spotted movement in the corner of the yard, a tiny insect emerging from the grass. He watched the delicate flapping of its wings as if time itself had slowed. The double Tomoe Sharingan had dramatically boosted his insight. Nathan could feel the raw power coursing through him. Confident that, even without drawing on Uchiha sword techniques or Konohagakure's blade arts, he could stand toe-to-toe with someone like Ohara Hideji. This was the true might of the evolved Sharingan, and the very reason why Uchiha Shinobi carried themselves with such unshakable pride. Nathan knew it wasn't the Uchiha's temperament that made them so proud. It was the power of those eyes. Think about it. Most ninjas spend over a decade training just to reach Chunin rank. An Uchiha, however, needs only to awaken the Sharingan, and voila, their strength soars past Chunin in an instant, erasing 10 years of hard work. Who, in those circumstances, could remain humble? Only Nathan understood the true origin of the Sharingan, and how insignificant it was compared to higher untapped powers, so he alone kept a level head. Without that knowledge, he might have succumbed to the same arrogance that consumed so many Uchiha. Shaking off his reflections, Nathan turned his attention inward, gauging the changes in his body. If awakening the Sharingan had enhanced his physical abilities, then its evolution should amplify them further, and it did. He felt a surge of mental clarity, a subtle but unmistakable increase in his cellular vitality. After a moment's careful assessment, once the new energy had fully settled, Nathan summoned his proficiency panel to check the results. Nathan stirred as a pale blue glow bathed his vision. Instantly, the familiar translucent data screen materialized before him. Name, Nathan, age 11, physique, 8, 9, spirit, 9, 11, chakra 24, 6109, bloodline, Sharingan, single Magatama 992 1000, double Maga, Tama 5000. Skills, chakra refining technique, level 4, 415, 510, 2000. Fire style, great fireball technique, level 2. Fire style, House of Immortals fire technique, level 3, 612, 710,000. Fire style, dragon fire technique, telekinesis technique, level 3, 460 of 11,000. Shadow clone technique, level 0, 5/10. Healing technique, level 1, 65, 200. Magic Sharingan, level 3, 2, 1000. Illusion Sharingan, level buff 2, 165, 500. Heart Reflection Technique, level 5, 1, 446, 5000. Konoha Style Sword Technique, level 4, 522,000. Uchiha Style Sword Technique, level 4. Ninja Tool Throwing, level 4, 352,000. Chakra Control, level 3, 210, the 220, 3 Body Technique, level 3, 0. Nathan closed his eyes and let the numbers sink in. Ever since his Sharingan had advanced to 2 Magatama, his physique had risen by 1 point, and his spiritual power by 2. The changes mirrored those he experienced when he first awakened the Sharingan, but were they truly the same? He thought back to the surge of raw chakra that had flooded his body, the way his heart pounded as if it had its own heartbeat, pulsing in perfect sync with his new, throbbing ocular power. Had he simply grown stronger because of the Sharingan's natural evolution? Or was there something deeper at work, some dormant force within the Uchiha bloodline that stirred with each new pupil in his eye? Nathan let out a slow breath and opened his eyes. One thing was certain. Every advancement brought him closer to mastering his fate and unlocking the full potential of the Sharingan. Nathan shook his head. No, it wasn't even close. At this stage, every single point he adds to his basic stats yields exponentially more power than the last. Raising his spiritual attribute from 9 to 11 now is at least twice as potent as the move from 7 to 9, and the same goes for his physique. He reminded himself how it felt when his Sharingan first awakened. Spiritual jumped from 7 to 9, physique from 6 to 7, and his chakra limit shot up by roughly 2,500 points. This time, however, he estimates a minimum increase of 5,000. In other words, once he fully unlocks this potential, his total chakra pool will blow past 10,000, a clear sign he's entered the top tier. And no, this isn't like Kakashi's so-called 10,000 chakra. On paper, Kakashi looks like he has a vast reserve, but in practice he can't even tap half of it. Since his Sharingan is innate, he rarely closes it and wastes chakra all the time. Nathan's new boost, by contrast, will be both genuine and usable. With 10,000 chakra points at his command, Nathan's endurance easily outstripped Kakashi's. He studied his chakra gauge intently, and sure enough, after a full minute it had slipped by 2 points. Activating the Sharingan had doubled his drain, from 1 point per minute with a single tomo to 2 points now. Even so, the consumption felt manageable. His only worry was whether it would still take 5 hours of continuous use to gain the slightest proficiency. Stretching that wait any longer would be frustrating. The answer lay in the small blood trace indicator on his display, 1/5000. As the meter ticked upward following his unlock of the two-tomo Sharingan, a tingling pulse raced across his scalp. Though evolving from one tomoe to two didn't mirror the exact process of his initial awakening, the proficiency requirement had surged, 10 times the original threshold and 5 times what the first tomoe demanded. At his current pace, 13 proficiency points a day, it would take Nathan 385 days, just over a year, to reach 5,000 points. And that estimate depends entirely on the level 5 reflection heart technique, continuing to bolster his double Magatama Sharingan at the same rate. If the technique's enhancement falters, the time required will stretch even further. Realizing this, Nathan lost all interest in reading ahead. He needed to know exactly how much the reflection heart technique was still contributing, and whether it would keep granting him a small proficiency boost every 5 hours once his Sharingan was activated. He had a sinking feeling that he wouldn't get any rest until he'd answered those questions. Without hesitation, he closed the on-screen panel, returned to his quarters, and began running tests one after another. Chapter 74: Boosting Income and Cutting Costs. The next morning arrived in a flash, and with it, the first day of the new Chunin exams at the Ninja Academy. Because of the exams, all Academy students had the day off, only the Jainin taking part and the Chunin and Jonin proctors were on site. Nathan stifled a yawn as he approached the Grand Academy gate for the first time in weeks, clutching his exam notification. After a quick glance at the paper, he headed toward the appointed classroom. Pushing open the door, he stepped into a large lecture hall already filled with anxious genin. Their disciplined bearing marked them as more than ordinary students. They were on the brink of proving themselves. Nathan was late. The instant he crossed the threshold, the room fell silent. Hundreds of eyes flicked up from desks or floor to ceiling, sizing him up. Whispers rippled through the ranks as they noticed the scarlet glow of his Sharingan. Though none stared overtly, Nathan could feel their curious gazes slipping over him again and again. He ignored it. Moving toward the back of the room, Nathan found an empty seat, settled in, and let the hush of anticipation wash over him. No matter the stares or murmurs, his mind stayed focused. Today marked the first step in mastering the art of the Shinobi, and of tightening his belt, both literally and figuratively. Nathan swept his gaze across the crowded classroom. Only a handful of seats remained, clustered in the back corner, so he made his way there and settled down. No sooner had he lowered himself into the chair than a soft voice reached his ear. "You must be Nathan, right?" He turned to see a boy with a small, rounded nose and striking Magatama-patterned Sharingan eyes offering him a friendly smile. Of course, it was Uchiha Shisui. Catching Nathan's caution, Shisui reached out his hand in greeting. "I'm Uchiha Shisui," he said cheerfully. "You're Nathan." Nathan's eyes briefly scanned the crimson swirls of Shisui's Sharingan. He gave a curt nod. "That's me. What do you want?" Shisui's grin wavered for a moment, then smoothed back into its easy warmth. "Nothing serious. I just thought we'd introduce ourselves." "Okay," Nathan replied, his tone flat. He turned away and draped himself across the desk, determined to make up for some much-needed shut-eye. As he closed his eyes, the memory of last night's test results flickered through his mind. Some highs, some lows. The best news? Even after unlocking the Sharingan, he still needed only 5 hours of focus to gain a single proficiency point. With that reassurance, sleep finally claimed him. Nathan's heart sank as he reviewed the figures. The reflection of the heart technique really had lost its edge. Before, every 2 proficiency points he gained translated into 1 evolution point toward his Sharingan. Now it took 3 points, or 510 chakra, to achieve the same progress. And because the chakra cost to sustain the Sharingan had doubled, his daily requirements shot skyward. To match his previous rate of 13 proficiency points per day, he'd need a staggering 5,700 chakra. Granted, his recent training had raised his maximum daily chakra from 5,500 to 8,000. But even with that boost, he couldn't pour all of it into accelerating his Sharingan's growth without jeopardizing his stamina and other jutsu. At 13 points a day, it would take him 385 more days just to advance to 3 Magatama. During that time, every other skill would stagnate. and his overall strength would barely budge. That wasn't an option. The Chunin exam was only the beginning. Sooner or later, he'd be thrown directly into battle. He couldn't afford to wait over a year to unlock the next stage of his Sharingan. Determination flared in Nathan's eyes. If the old method had become too sluggish, he'd find a new way to push himself forward, and fast. Nathan knew all too well that on the battlefield, an enemy won't grant you the luxury of slow, steady progress. He had to accelerate his growth without stalling the evolution of his Sharingan. The only solution was to maximize his gains while minimizing his chakra expenditure. First, he needed to become more efficient, using the least chakra to achieve the greatest effect. That meant improving his chakra control skill. Currently, it sat at level 3, 221,000 experience, which granted him a 16% chakra reduction when performing ninjutsu or genjutsu. Reaching level 4 would boost that savings to 20%. Though a mere 4% might sound trivial at first, those small margins accumulate rapidly over repeated techniques and long missions. Fortunately, as his Sharingan blossomed into the Two-Tomoe stage, Nathan found himself far more attuned to the ebb and flow of chakra. Every flicker of energy under his skin felt more familiar, more responsive. With this heightened sensitivity, leveling up chakra control wouldn't be as arduous as before. He set his sights on that next rank, knowing each incremental improvement would edge him closer to the power he needed and to survival on the front lines. Nathan paused to consider his next move. If he truly wanted to push his limits, stealing the Sand Ninja's puppet technique would be a game-changer. By refining it, condensing the chakra threads, and mastering precise control, he could raise his ceiling higher than ever. Perhaps, once this mission was over, he could even request a transfer to the front lines against the Sand Ninja. He tucked that idea away for later and turned his attention to another challenge: how to expand his chakra pool. Relying solely on conservation tactics could only take him so far. A more reliable strategy was open sourcing his chakra, finding new ways to generate or harness it. First, Nathan could enhance his own physique. He had a strong inkling that once he merged the Konoha-style sword art with the Uchiha-style sword art, his physical attributes would improve naturally. That fusion would boost his endurance and, by extension, increase the total chakra he could muster each day. Second, he could supplement his internal reserves with external tools. Legendary weapons or chakra-amplifying instruments offered enormous potential. For instance, the Hidden Mist Village's famed greatsword, Samahada, was said to draw in and store vast amounts of chakra. If Nathan could get his hands on it, or even a fragment, he would dramatically increase his available energy. With a clear plan forming in his mind, Nathan squared his shoulders and steeled himself for the trials ahead. Between perfecting the stolen puppet technique, fusing two powerful sword arts, and securing a chakra-boosting weapon, his path to greater strength was set, and nothing would stand in his way. Nathan's mind raced as he considered the legendary sword Samahada. Its fabled ability to absorb an opponent's chakra and channel it back to its wielder could revolutionize any shinobi's growth. Each battle would literally fuel new skills, accelerating strength gains far beyond normal limits. But at this moment, Samahada lay firmly in the grip of the Watermelon Mountain Puffer Ghost, a rogue shinobi from the Hidden Mist Village whose mastery of dark chakra made him all but untouchable. Nathan knew he didn't stand a chance of wresting the blade away. Even if he somehow did, Samahada wasn't a tool any random ninja could claim. The sword possessed its own will and would only bond with a chosen master. His thoughts drifted to another rare artifact, the Infinite Abyss armor of the Takumino village. Like Samahada, it could draw in external chakra and return it to its wearer. But that relic was even more elusive, and, rumor had it, its destined bearer hadn't yet been born. Trapped between two unreachable prizes, Nathan forced himself to silence the daydreams. For now, all he could do was train harder, bide his time, and hope fate would one day grant him a chance to claim power beyond imagining. Beyond the array of ninja tools, some ninjutsu actually siphon chakra from their targets. Take, for example, Water Style, Great Samadan Technique, Earth Style, Earth Prison Hall, Shiki Kiss, and Wood Style, Wood Dragon Technique. In theory, masked, airing, these jutsu could massively accelerate a shinobi's growth. The catch, however, is that they demand either a special bloodline limit or a newly awakened chakra nature, abilities Nathan has only just unlocked. Even then, most of these scrolls are so rare, he'd never have the chance to learn them. Yet their very existence shows chakra-absorbing ninjutsu aren't unheard of. As a clan whose legacy stretches back thousands of years, the Uchiha must possess similar forbidden arts in their archives. Maybe, Nathan thought as he lay down, after this exam, I'll see if I can track some of them down. With that last thought, his consciousness slipped into a deep sleep. Nearby, Uchiha Shisui watched him drift off and couldn't help but smile at how generously his comrade could rest, even on the eve of such a crucial test. Chapter 75. The exam begins. Ring, ring, ring. The sudden peal of bells jolted Nathan from his half-dream. Blinking awake, he looked up to see more than a dozen Konoha ninjas filing into the examination hall. At their head strode a Jonin examiner, clutching a plain canvas bag emblazoned with the words, "Top Secret," in bold red letters. There was no doubt what it contained, the written portion of the Chunin exam. After shepherding the candidates to their newly assigned seats, the Jonin unfastened the bag and distributed the scrolls. He offered only one admonition as he did so: cheating won't be tolerated. Then, without another word, he stepped back, eyes scanning the room. Nathan unfolded his test scroll and glanced over the questions. They were straightforward applications of theoretical knowledge, average difficulty for any ninja who'd studied seriously. Merely passing the exam seemed almost inevitable. But Nathan wasn't aiming just to scrape by. He wanted a top-tier score. He settled his shoulders, dipped his brush in ink, and let his concentration sharpen. With clear questions and strict no-cheating rules, the examiners had made their expectations obvious. Rely on your own skill. Nathan raised his pen and began writing, determined to prove himself on his own merit. Nathan didn't need any clever tricks to pass this test. His own knowledge was more than enough to guarantee a top score. So he kept his head down and worked steadily, leaving the drama to others. Time dragged on until, halfway through the exam, a sharp voice cut through the silence. "Number 45, please stand up." All eyes swung to the window, where a proctor had risen from his chair and was striding toward a student seated near the center of the room. The boy at seat 45 turned ashen, knuckles white as he gripped the edge of his desk. He hesitated for a moment, then quietly rose and followed the proctor out the door. The man returned to his seat, and an oppressive gloom settled over the room. Nathan barely registered it. What did any of this have to do with him? With a calm breath, he refocused on his own exam paper. By the time the bell rang, 4 more students had been caught cheating, and the first written test was finally over. When the bell rang, the proctor stood and gathered the test papers, ushering everyone to remain quietly in their seats until the last sheet was collected. Only then were the candidates free to leave. According to the exam schedule, the results of the written test would be posted at noon, and those who'd passed would move on to the second, more comprehensive assessment. Until then, they were free to come and go as they pleased. Nathan had burned the midnight oil to prepare and had rushed straight from cramming into the exam room that very morning. Now, with time to spare, he didn't hesitate. He found an empty corner, curled up on a wooden bench, and slept for 2 solid hours. When he woke, the sun was climbing high in the sky. He strolled back to the central notice board outside the academy's main hall. A single sheet of parchment was pinned there, listing 59 successful candidates. Nathan scanned the names, and there it was, his own among them. He'd passed the written test without a hitch, 59 out of roughly 100 entrants, a 50% pass rate. It matched the academy's historical average. Clearly, Konoha's leadership was setting a firm bar in this first stage, but not so high as to choke off talent. If the written exam was this challenging yet fair, Nathan figured the second stage wouldn't be unbearable. Why keep the first hurdle tough but not impossible? The answer was simple. Konoha needed more shinobi, strong, dependable ninja to bolster its ranks. And Nathan intended to be one of them. If the Chunin exam were as unforgiving as the first, with only 1 or 2 candidates promoted each time, how could Konoha possibly staff its frontline forces? Nathan knew the higher-ups wouldn't repeat that mistake. They needed numbers more than perfection. On the battlefield, survival itself marks you as an elite. Casualties incurred during testing were simply collateral damage in the pursuit of victory. The village elders cared only about winning the war. Nothing else mattered. Shaking his head to clear such grim thoughts, Nathan turned his attention to the next challenge, the 44th Training Ground, better known as the Death Forest. This forbidding arena stretched nearly 20 kilometers across, its outer edge ringed with rusted barbed wire. A solitary watchtower loomed at the center, and between it and the wire lay dense woodland, tangled rivers, and murky lakes. Toxic miasmas clung to the air, while venomous insects and savage beasts prowled beneath the thick canopy. It was the perfect setting to test every skill, every instinct, exactly where the second phase of the exam would begin. Nathan approached the edge of the Forest of Death, Konoha's most frequently used venue for the Chunin exams. Though the test wouldn't begin for another 2 hours, dozens of hopefuls had already gathered, some clustered in teams of 2 or 3, while others stood alone. None spoke a word, all waiting in tense silence. He understood their mood. Which of these shinobi hadn't fought on the front lines? Who among them hadn't lost comrades in battle? They had come here together, sworn to prove themselves, but now each stood isolated. Even Nathan, as he walked among them, couldn't help but think of Mizutani Shizuko and Ryosuke. Fighting down the ache of loneliness, he found a quiet spot at the forest's edge and sat cross-legged. Eyes closed, he began refining his chakra. Thanks to the improvements in his basic attributes, the former limits of his body felt less oppressive. As he ran the chakra refinement technique, he not only replenished his chakra stores, but gently pushed outward the boundaries of his maximum reserves. By the time Nathan opened his eyes, the sun was climbing higher. In a few short hours, the Chunin exams would begin, and he would be ready. As Nathan had suspected, his chakra extraction technique had just leveled up to 4. Now, every hour he spent on the chakra refining technique increased his chakra limit by 16 points, double what he'd gained at level 3. In practical terms, 8 hours of daily practice would net him 128 additional points each day. At that rate, boosting his chakra ceiling by a full 5,000 points would take only about 40 days, unlocking his latent potential far more quickly than before. That was the true power of a high-tier refining technique. The only drawback was that he still needed over 400 proficiency points to reach level 5. At his current pace of accumulation, that would take nearly half a year, a painfully long wait. He could try to open new sources internally, of course, but such methods carried unpredictable risks. According to the jump he'd seen when moving from level 3 to level 4, once the refining technique hit level 5, his daily chakra gains would surge again by at least 1,300 points. Nathan clenched his fists. 6 more months of grinding proficiency. Was there really no shortcut? Damn, he muttered, eyes narrowing as he weighed his options. Nathan let out a soft sigh, shrugged off his wandering thoughts, and dove back into his training. As the hour of the exam approached, more and more candidates filed in. Roughly 60 genin who had passed the written test gathered here about an hour beforehand, and the once quiet ground suddenly buzzed with conversation. Clusters of hopefuls compared notes, swapped rumors, and sized one another up. Nathan heard his name drift across the crowd a few times and felt the weight of curious gazes on his back, yet he paid them no mind. In the face of his unshakable skill, he knew that any hidden agenda or whispered conspiracy was laughable, so he simply returned to his drills, utterly indifferent to the stares around him. Chapter 76, The Second Exam. An hour later, a hush settled over the training grounds as the appointed time for the second exam arrived. Nathan, finishing the last of his warm-up stretches, looked up to see a lone figure striding toward the assembly. Everyone stopped their chatter and training. Tense anticipation filled the air. The man in front of them was tall and composed, wearing the green flak jacket of a Konoha Jonin. He cleared his throat and held up a hand for silence. "Allow me to introduce myself," he began. "I am Tanagawa Maki, and I will be your examiner for this stage of the exam." Nathan's heart pounded. He'd heard rumors about the Forest of Death, but now it seemed they were about to step right into it. Maki turned and motioned toward the dense woodland looming behind him. Towering trees, thick vines and underbrush stretched as far as the eye could see. "I'm sure you all know your second exam takes place in that forest," Maki continued. "Before you enter, however, you need to understand exactly what you're up against." He paused, letting the gravity of the situation sink in. Then he outlined the forest's hazards: venomous wildlife, poisonous plants, treacherous terrain, and the likelihood of encountering hostile ninjas from other villages. "One wrong move," he warned, "and you could be lost forever." At his words, a collective intake of breath rippled through the crowd. Nathan felt a chill run down his spine, but he squared his shoulders. He'd trained for this. There was no turning back now. Without another word, Maki reached into the folds of his sleeve and produced a thick stack of forms. He held them aloft for all to see. "Because of the extreme danger you'll face," he announced, "each candidate must sign this consent form. It releases Konoha from liability and makes it clear that you alone bear responsibility for your safety." He handed the top form to a nearby genin, nodding for him to pass the rest down the line. As Nathan took the crisp paper, he glanced at the fine print, feeling the weight of what he was about to undertake. Then, heart steadying, he dipped his pen and signed. The die was cast. In moments, they would step into the forest of death, and only those with determination, skill, and a bit of luck would emerge. Nathan tucked the consent form under his arm as Maki Tanagawa surveyed the crowd with a faint smile. A few candidates flushed, glancing at one another. Seeming to notice their unease, Maki's tone turned light, almost reassuring. "If any of you feel nervous, you're free to opt out. Just don't sign, and you won't have to take the exam." A murmur rippled through the group, but it was quickly stifled by Maki's next words. "Of course, if you choose not to sign, you'll forfeit your chance to participate in the next round of exams." That settled it. The gathered hopefuls had come this far for one reason: to sit the Chunin exam. Without signing, there was no exam, and without the exam, there was nothing. Nathan flicked his gaze over the form's printed clauses. Statements like, "I voluntarily participate in this Chunin exam, and I assume full responsibility for any injuries sustained." Nothing he hadn't seen before. It was nearly identical to the pre-exam commitment he'd signed in his previous life. He paused for a heartbeat, then dipped his pen and scrawled his name at the bottom. One by one, over the next 10 minutes, all 60 candidates followed suit. Not a single person balked at the risks. With the forms collected, Maki nodded to the supervising elders. The Chunin exam would proceed, danger and all. After collecting all the signed consent forms, Tanagawa Maki gave a satisfied nod. "Now," he said, "I'll explain the rules for the second exam." He reached into his robe and produced 2 ancient scrolls, one stamped with the single character for heaven, the other with earth. Holding them up, he addressed the candidates. "These are the Book of Heaven and the Book of Earth." A murmur ran through the group. "What do we do with them?" someone asked. Maki tucked the scrolls away and continued. "Your next challenge revolves around these 2 books. There are 60 of you. 30 will be assigned the Book of Heaven, 30 the Book of Earth. To pass this stage, you must reunite both scrolls and deliver them to the central tower." He paused, letting the rules sink in. "Once any team, heaven and earth together, reaches the tower with both books in hand, the exam is complete and you will advance." Before Miss Tanagawa had even finished her instructions, a student shouted out, "Teacher, some teams have 6 members while others have only 2, or in one case, just a single person. How is that fair?" "Fair?" Miss Tanagawa's eyes narrowed, her voice dropping to a cold edge. "Do you think your enemies on the battlefield will play fair?" A hush fell over the group as memories of past skirmishes flashed through their minds. When the whispers died away, she went on, "And if you really feel outnumbered, you're free to form alliances. There are more than enough scrolls out there. Grab as many as you can." At her words, eager faces lit up. Students began turning toward one another, looking for partners. Every solo combatant jumped to their feet, everyone except Nathan. He remained seated, calm and unhurried. He trusted his own skill to secure the scroll he wanted. As for alliances, too few members meant they'd be crushed by a well-coordinated team, and too many often led to infighting. Nathan preferred to rely on himself. Nathan wasn't especially optimistic about the new format. Still, there was no denying that handing each contender their own scroll rather than one per team, greatly improved everyone's odds of advancing. Nathan thought to himself, they've really lowered the difficulty of this Chunin exam. When Tanagawa Maki went over the penalties for failure, his instructions were straightforward. Any team that failed to reach the central tower within 5 days would be disqualified. Likewise, squads so depleted they could no longer fight would be eliminated. Finally, he issued a stern warning. No one was allowed to open their scroll before arriving at the central tower. What happened to those who disobeyed? He didn't say, and no one dared ask. But Nathan knew better. Each scroll was sealed with a potent hypnosis jutsu. Anyone who broke the seal prematurely would fall into an unbreakable slumber until the exam ended. Could my Sharingan resist that spell? He wondered. Maybe I could test it. The thought flared up suddenly, and Nathan stamped it down just as quickly. Some risks weren't worth taking. Chapter 7. The second exam begins. Everything was in place. 60 candidates stood before the Iron Gate, their ranks split into 32-person teams. Beyond that gate lay a 5-day survival test, part of the Chunin selection process. When the signal finally sounded, the heavy doors creaked open, and the anxious candidates filed into the so-called Forest of Death. Nathan stepped across the threshold and was immediately struck by an oppressive gloom. Though dusk had not yet fallen, the dense canopy overhead, blotting out the sky, made it seem perpetually twilight beneath the trees. Shafts of muted light pierced the leaves in a few spots, but most of the forest lay in shadow. A damp chill hung in the air, and distant roars echoed through the undergrowth. Nathan's heart thudded in his chest, but he recognized the sensation, unease born of an unfamiliar, forbidding place. He took a steadying breath. Harsh environments didn't intimidate him. If anything, they energized him. He forced the tension from his shoulders, letting his keen eyes roam the murky forest. A quick glance at his teammates, none of whom seemed ready to move, reminded him that hesitation could cost precious time. Nathan activated his Sharingan, the scarlet glow sharpening his vision. Every rustle of leaves, every subtle shift in shadow came into clearer focus. Mapping out the terrain in his mind, he spotted a break in the trees to the north, the nearest entrance or exit point. If he could dash there quickly, he might scout ahead, or at least establish a safe rendezvous for his partner. Without a second thought, Nathan took off. His feet barely made a sound on the soft forest floor as he wove between trunks and leapt over gnarled roots. On the outskirts of the forest, danger seldom sprang upon you unawares. The greater peril was venturing deep where predators lurked. Minutes later, he emerged into a small clearing marking the forest's edge. The air here felt fresher, the shadows less suffocating. Nathan stood still, eyes scanning the horizon beyond the entrance. He had arrived, and with the survival test just beginning, there was no time to waste. Whatever lay ahead in this forest, he was ready. Nathan paused at the edge of the clearing, scanning the packed earth for any sign of recent passage. The death forest lay before him like a vast, cruel arena, nearly circular, 20 kilometers across, its perimeter ringed by 60 kilometers of razor-wire fence. Out of 44 gates, only 32 teams had entered, so Nathan had no way of knowing whether this particular breach had been used. Fortune, however, favored him. A fresh set of footprints betrayed a 70% chance someone had slipped through here not long ago. Activating the Sharingan, he honed in on the faintest disturbances in the soil and swiftly calculated the intruder's numbers and direction, 3 figures moving northwest. Without a second's hesitation, Nathan sprang forward, tracing their recent passage and plunging into the forest's shadowy depths in pursuit. Nathan moved swiftly through the dense forest, senses alert for any sign of danger. Without warning, a gleaming kunai pierced the undergrowth to his right. Instinctively, he rolled to one side and sprinted toward a nearby tree, vaulted up its trunk, and landed on a sturdy branch. The instant his boot touched the wood, he sensed something was off. Glancing down, he spotted a nearly invisible tripwire stretched taut between 2 saplings. A trap. His mind raced back to the white-haired ape he'd killed not long ago. Had its companions set this ambush? Earlier, the ape had fixed him with a strange, unsettling stare as he passed. Nathan had shrugged it off, determined not to invite more trouble. But the ape's environment, this tangled jungle, favored its kind. Before long, Nathan found himself in a fierce struggle, expending so much energy just to fend off his pursuer that he assumed no one else had noticed. He never imagined the very team he'd been chasing was close enough to lay a trap. Now all the pieces fell into place. The missing kunai, the hidden wire, the sudden attack. The three mercenaries trailing him had sprung their snare. Nathan steadied his breathing, eyes narrowing as he prepared to strike back. Whoosh! Dozens of kunai tore through the air, converging on Nathan from every direction and cutting off every avenue of escape. Most people, faced with such a trap, would freeze or hunker down and wait for the worst. Nathan, however, merely grinned. "Quite the setup," he murmured, voice steady. In that instant, the two magatama embedded in his blood-red eyes began to spin, their arcane glow mapping the trajectory of each incoming projectile. Calculating their paths in a heartbeat, he shifted his weight, slithered between the steel blades, and evaded them all. The kunai whistled past, embedding themselves harmlessly in the floor and walls. From the shadows, three figures froze, jaws agape. One of them cleared his throat. "You going to come out on your own?" he called. "Or should we drag you out?" Nathan's gaze swept the darkness until it settled on their hiding place. He stayed perfectly calm, as if the whole affair bored him, but inside he was buzzing with excitement. It takes real skill to orchestrate a trap like that, he thought. Definitely not amateurs. He tilted his head and answered, "Impressive trick. But if you'd rather I leave this comfort zone, show yourselves. I promise I'll make it worthwhile." His tone was casual, almost inviting, yet every word was charged with unmistakable confidence. Deep down, Nathan was eager. This was exactly the kind of challenge he lived for. Nathan didn't underestimate even a handful of ordinary shinobi. As the saying went, when a lion fights a rabbit, every blow must count. Relying on the raw power of his dual Magatama Sharingan without caution would be a sure path to defeat. There were too many ninjutsu and forbidden techniques in the world to take any threat lightly. Vigilance had kept him alive so far. "Aren't you going to show yourself?" he called out, voice steady. Before the words had fully left his lips, a volley of shuriken whistled through the air. Nathan barely bothered to turn. A few swift sidesteps were enough to send all the blades clattering harmlessly to the ground. But even as he landed, a prickling sense of danger crept up his spine. Out of the corner of his eye, he caught sight of a dark shape hurtling toward him. "Shadow possession technique?" Nathan murmured. In an instant, he recognized the signature movement of the Nara clan's most feared jutsu, and with it, the face of his opponent, Nara Seihai. Nathan, the only Nara clan shinobi in this Chunin exam, watched with keen interest. The instant he saw the shadow secret technique unfolding before him, he knew exactly who he was facing. No wonder the opponent's traps were so meticulously calculated. He had to be Nara Seihei, another genius of their clan. True to form, Seihei used kunai attacks to pinpoint Nathan's every landing spot, luring him toward cleverly concealed pits. But against overwhelming power, even the smartest maneuvers were mere breadcrumbs. Nathan's mind raced as he leapt and twisted, narrowly evading shadowy binds that sought to freeze him in place. At last, the shadows lunged, only to halt a mere dozen centimeters from his chest. Their range was simply too limited. Seeing his chance, Nathan didn't hesitate. Fluidly, he wove the hand seals for fire release, Phoenix Immortal Flame technique. In an explosion of motion, he thrust his hands forward, and torrents of bright, scorching fire surged out in a furious blaze. Seihei's shadows writhed and recoiled as Nathan's inferno roared onto the battlefield. The heat was fierce enough to melt steel. The roar of crackling flames echoed off the exam ground's stone walls. Seizing the moment, Nathan pressed the attack, confident that he had finally turned the tide against his cunning opponent. Under Nathan's command, the flames erupted with deadly precision, scouring the trio's hiding place. With a series of thunderous bangs, Nara Chenge and his two partners were driven into the open. Swish, swish, kunai hissed through the air toward Nathan. He weaved between them effortlessly, eyes tracking each blade. As the final kunai whirred past his face, he shot out his right hand, snagged the ring at its tail on his index finger, and, with a deft twist of his wrist, sent it spinning around his finger before hurling it back. Whoosh! The kunai thudded into the tree 3 inches above Sato Masaru's head. Masaru flinched, heart pounding, his face draining of color as he stared up at the blade's tip quivering in the bark. He swallowed hard. If the throw had been a hair tighter, he would be dead. Sato Katsu, standing a few paces away, watched the exchange with narrow eyes. Did Nathan really intend to miss by such a narrow margin, he wondered. Then Katsu turned his gaze toward Nathan, searching his expression for any sign of mercy or malice. Nathan's eyes locked onto the blood-red swirl of the Sharingan in his opponent's gaze, and he instantly knew she was holding back. With those piercing eyes, she would never have allowed him to close the distance otherwise. Ignoring Sato Katsu standing by, Nathan's form blurred as he struck forward. Aoki Hongzi's eyes widened in surprise when Nathan materialized at arm's length. Instinctively, she vaulted backward and drew a kunai, ready to throw. But Nathan was already moving. "Genjutsu, Sharingan," he murmured, his hands weaving through the seals with inhuman speed. He'd had barely an instant to prepare, yet the illusion he unleashed surpassed the standard hypnotic tricks of the Sharingan, and that was all he needed. Mid-leap, Aoki Hongzi froze. Her retreat faltered, and confusion clouded her expression. Her eyelids fluttered uncontrollably, as if sleep itself beckoned her into darkness. Clang! The sharp ring of steel leaving its sheath split the air, and Nathan braced himself for what came next. Nathan's blade whistled through the air, slicing the kunai out of Narihei's hand before it could find its mark. In the same motion, he pivoted and delivered a powerful kick that sent Aoki Hongzi sprawling across the training yard. Narihei froze, eyes widening. He raised his hands in a gesture of surrender. Nathan hesitated only for an instant. He understood immediately. Narihei was outmatched. With a swift movement, the ninja drew 3 parchment scrolls from his tool pouch and flung them to the ground. "We yield," Narihei panted, voice hoarse. "These are the scrolls for the 3 of us." Nathan strode forward, each step measured and calm. He surveyed the scrolls scattered at his feet. 3 identical bindings, each stamped with the same emblem. Curious, he knelt and picked one up with the tip of his short sword, pricking his thumb on the parchment's edge to test its authenticity. Sure enough, every scroll bore the title, Book of the Earth. He allowed himself a faint smile. If an entire team carried the same scroll, there'd be nothing to test, no chance for distinction. Yet this uniformity played to his advantage. Satisfied that the scrolls were genuine and unaltered, he stood and sheathed his sword. "Your decision is noted," he said coolly. Without another word, Nathan turned and left the yard, the afternoon sun glinting off his polished blade as he strode toward the next challenge. Only after Nathan departed did Nara Chengping finally exhale in relief. "Is the Sharingan really that powerful?" Sato Masaru called after Nathan's retreating figure, his voice edged with disbelief. He turned to Nara Seihei, eyes wide. "No," Seihei replied, shaking his head gravely. "It's not the Sharingan that's powerful, it's Uchiha Seimei himself." "Really?" Masaru echoed, frowning. Seihei replayed the entire duel in his mind, Nathan's pinpoint control of ninjutsu, his split-second choices under pressure, and the way he leveraged the Sharingan to stay 3 steps ahead. Even the combined strength of Masaru, Seihei, and their third teammate would only have given them about a 20% chance against him. Once Nathan spared Seihei's life, Seihei knew resistance was futile and yielded immediately to minimize losses. He'd also gambled that Nathan wouldn't seize every scroll, just the one he needed. As it turned out, he was right. Nathan took only that single scroll and left the other 2 untouched. Nathan's team only needed the Earth Scroll to clear this level, so missing 1 scroll wasn't a problem. That was precisely why he'd said the exam's difficulty had been eased. Everyone here hailed from the same village, and no one would kill another unless absolutely necessary. In a team of 3 or more, a member in danger could simply hand over a scroll to buy time. Of course, that safety net only applied if their opponents weren't lone wolves. Facing one-man teams meant you either brought extra scrolls or risked elimination, or worse, having your scrolls stolen. Nathan paid no mind to Nara Chengping's scorn. With both the Heaven Scroll and the Earth Scroll secured, he dashed straight for the central tower. 5 days could feel both long and short, fleeting for most, but for Nathan, enough time to make significant gains. He already had his training schedule laid out. Nathan began each day with a full reserve of 8,000 chakra points. His first priority was the reflecting heart technique. which consumed 3,500 points daily. This intensive training boosted his black jutsu proficiency and, as a side effect, raised his Sharingan's evolution level by 7 points. Next, he spent 600 chakra points maintaining his Sharingan over 15 hours, about 40 points per hour, to sustain the 3 evolution points he'd unlocked. That left him with 3,900 points. He earmarked 2,500 of those for 3 core skills: Fire Release, Phoenix Fire Jutsu, the Shaolin Magic Technique, and Illusion Sharingan. By dividing his chakra equally among them, he gained roughly 10 proficiency points in each skill. With 1,400 chakra points remaining, Nathan turned to the Instant Body Technique, also known as the Blinking Body Technique. As a D-rank ninjutsu, it normally costs 50 chakra points per use, but his level 3 chakra control, 220,000, granted a 16% savings, reducing each execution to about 42 points. By investing 420 chakra points, he could boost his proficiency in the technique by 10 points, rounding out his training regimen for the day. Nathan leaned back, reviewing his chakra allocation one more time. He decided to dedicate 600 chakra points to refining his medical ninjutsu, enough, from past experience, to raise his healing proficiency by 7 points. That left roughly 300 points to be split among 4 other disciplines: Konoha-style swordsmanship, Uchiha-style swordsmanship, shuriken throwing, and chakra control. With this plan, every one of his skills would make measurable progress, except, of course, for Fire Release, Great Fireball Technique, Fire Release, Dragon Flame Technique, and the Shadow Clone Technique, which he'd set aside for now. It might look as though he was outpacing even his teacher, but Nathan trusted his proficiency panel to keep him on track. Barring any surprises, he would stick with this distribution of chakra until the end of the exams. As for the next stage of his Sharingan's evolution and the possibility of learning that rare clan ninjutsu capable of absorbing another shinobi's chakra, he would simply have to wait and see. The trials ahead would decide whether he could master such a formidable technique. Chapter Text: The Central Tower. Nathan realized that without any outside enhancements, his only options were to raise his basic attributes through sheer effort or to deepen his mastery of the chakra refining technique and the reflecting heart technique. With that in mind, he quickened his pace. More than half an hour later, he arrived at the outskirts of the central tower. Along the way, he'd slipped into shadows at the first sign of danger, and when stealth failed, he unleashed precise thunder jutsu, clearing obstacles in an instant. His methods cost him little time, and he reached his destination well before dusk. He paused at the tower's base, scanning the area for ambushes. When the coast seemed clear, he pushed open the heavy door with a low groan and stepped inside. The vast hall was empty, not a soul stirred, and the customary Chunin exam banner that the third Hokage usually hung here was nowhere to be seen. Unfazed, Nathan dropped into a quiet corner and began his training. To him, the Chunin exam was merely a checkpoint. The real battle lay in refining his own skills. Sunrise after sunrise, he practiced in solitude, focusing on every nuance of his techniques. Day by day, his strength and chakra control improved, and little by little, other candidates began to trickle in, filling the tower's corridors with hushed excitement. As Nathan closed his eyes and centered himself, he felt a calm determination settle over him. The true test was only just beginning. Nathan arrived at the tower just minutes after Uchiha Shisui, making him the third to show up. Clearly, the Chunin exam posed little challenge for either of them. Shisui had tried on several occasions to strike up a conversation, but each time he found Nathan deep in intense training, so he let him be. 4 days slipped by in the blink of an eye. By the time the exam window closed, over 25 genin had gathered inside the tower, 28 in total. Even the Nara Chengping team, whose scroll Nathan had pilfered earlier, passed without a hitch and arrived the very next day. In this surprisingly relaxed exam format, quick thinking and resourcefulness proved just as valuable as raw strength. Suddenly, a plume of chakra smoke billowed outward. Every genin scroll, the fabled Book of Heaven and Book of Earth, snapped open on its own. In that instant, the latent possession spell etched across each page ignited, and with a crackle of energy, Tanagawa Maki materialized in the arena. The room fell utterly silent as every candidate turned to her, eyes alight with anticipation. Maki offered them nothing but a steady, unreadable gaze. After scanning the assembled circle, he cleared his throat and announced, "First of all, congratulations, you've all passed the second exam." An uproar of cheers swept the field, led by teams of 2 or 3 whose voices rang out the loudest. Tanagawa Maki raised both hands to demand silence. When the noise died down, he went on. "You have the night to rest. Tomorrow morning, the final exam will begin, and as for the location," he tapped the ground at his feet. "It's right here. Medical ninjas will arrive shortly. Anyone who needs treatment can report to them." With that, Tanagawa Maki vanished in a flash, using the body flicker technique. The moment he disappeared, the field burst back into excited chatter. Nathan stared at the spot where Maki had stood, turning the announcement over in his mind. Holding the final exam here meant it would be kept off-limits to outsiders. But given the current wartime climate, when the village needed to demonstrate its strength and keep its reserve forces under wraps, the secrecy made perfect sense. Under these circumstances, staging the exam at a hidden location was the only prudent choice. Chapter 79, Easy Victory. Morning arrived in the blink of an eye. After a night's rest and the careful ministrations of the medical ninja, all 28 injured candidates were on the mend. At that moment, the door swung open with a soft creak, and a dozen shinobi filed in, led by the third Hokage himself, Sarutobi Hiruzen. Alongside the proctors from the first and second exams were many of the candidates' instructors, their expressions grave but composed. Nathan scanned the newcomers, hoping vainly that Furukawa might still be among them. But the young man was gone. No trace. His heart clenched for an instant, then shifted as Nathan recognized another face in the crowd. Not a close friend, exactly, but someone who had quietly helped him when he first arrived in the village, the Uchiha Jonin, Uchiha Haruto. Their eyes met. Nathan offered a respectful nod. Haruto acknowledged it with a slight bow. Haruto had come at the Uchiha clan's request, not only to back their celebrated prodigy, Shisui Uchiha, but also to extend support to Nathan himself. Shisui needed every advantage to live up to the clan's high expectations, of course. Yet even Nathan, an outsider to Uchiha lineage, had earned their notice, and now their protection. Haruto Uchiha couldn't forget his first impression of Nathan. When he'd been discreetly observing him at the Great Elder's request, he'd been convinced there was simply no way Nathan could ever awaken the Sharingan. And yet, here they were only a few months later, and Nathan's eyes bore the unmistakable symbol of the twin Magatama. Haruto could only shake his head and reflect. Nothing is ever permanent. Still, he understood the shifting currents of fate. In just a few months' time, 2 comrades and their teacher had fallen in tragic circumstances. Such profound loss could awaken the Sharingan in the most unlikely of candidates. What he couldn't reconcile, however, was why Nathan had shown no ocular sign at all when he'd learned of his parents' deaths. Perhaps that grief hadn't reached him with the same intensity. After all, Haruto thought wryly, you can't ignite what you haven't seen with your own eyes. He maintained a calm, unreadable expression as he took his seat among the other adults. Once everyone was settled, third Hokage, Hiruzen Sarutobi, rose to give a concise overview of the proceedings. Then a stern-faced Konoha Jonin stepped forward. "I will be presiding over the next stage of the exam," the Jonin announced. "Listen carefully, for these are the rules you must follow." At his words, every candidate leaned forward, eager to catch each detail. The examiner climbed onto the raised platform, his robe whispering against the wood as he surveyed the 28 hopefuls before him. When the courtyard fell silent, he spoke. "First, this exam is an individual elimination tournament. Each of you may choose to withdraw now. Once it begins, there will be no turning back. Second, the contest will be real combat. 2 competitors drawn at random will face off in a one-on-one duel. The victor advances. This continues until a single champion remains. There are no restrictions on tactics or weaponry. A match ends only when one fighter is incapacitated, surrenders, or is unable to continue. I know this sounds harsh, but to prevent needless bloodshed, I will personally intervene as soon as I deem the outcome decided. At that moment, all hostilities must cease." A tremor ran through the group. Eyes darted nervously, fingers itched toward sheaths, and hearts pounded. The examiner paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. Now, is there anyone who wishes to withdraw? Silence answered him. No one moved. He nodded once, satisfied. Very well. With no withdrawals, the exam officially begins. He signaled to a nearby chunin, who carried forward a lacquered wooden box. The examiner reached in, his motion deliberate, and withdrew 2 folded paper slips. Your first bout, he announced, holding the slips aloft for all to see, will be between. And with that, the deadly tournament was underway. Then unrolled the summons and read the names aloud. Haruto Akaikade. At his call, the 2 contenders, one tall, the other notably shorter, stepped onto the fighting platform below. Their fellow students pressed to the railing of the second-floor corridor, eager for a clear view of the match. Begin, the examiner barked. In an instant, Haruto and Akaikade drew their kunai. The clash of steel rang out as they closed the distance, exchanging swift, precise strikes. Their skills in close-quarters combat were almost perfectly matched, and for several breathless moments, neither man could claim the advantage. Then, spotting a split-second opening, Haruto sprang back, clutching his side where a blade had grazed him. He grunted through the pain and channeled earth chakra into the ground at his feet. With a low rumble, the soil roiled and rose in thick mud, wrapping around Akaikade's ankles in an earth escape ninjutsu known as the mud binding technique. Before Kade could free himself, Haruto let fly a flurry of shuriken. 2 struck true, one whistling toward Kade's throat, another aimed at his eyes. The examiner intercepted the throws at the last moment, deflecting them harmlessly aside. Immobilized and wounded, Akaikade could muster no more than a feeble defiance. Realizing defeat was inevitable, he let his kunai clatter to the platform and bowed his head in surrender. The examiner nodded in approval. It had been a solid demonstration of skill and strategy, nothing flashy but undeniably effective. By turning his own injury into an advantage and seizing the perfect moment to strike, Haruto had earned his victory fair and square. Otherwise, the outcome was anyone's guess. First match goes to Yangdu, the examiner boomed. He motioned the 2 shinobi off the stage, then reached into a wooden box and drew out 2 folded slips of paper. Opening them, he announced, Takakura Shota versus Uchiha Seimei. Nathan's heart skipped a beat, but he squared his shoulders and climbed the stone steps to the arena's center. He hadn't expected to be called for the second bout so soon, but there was no avoiding it. Everyone had to prove themselves eventually. Strength was the true foundation. The stronger you were, the less you had to fear having eyes on you. Standing opposite Nathan was a boy of 15 or 16, clearly no prodigy, or he would have long ago outgrown genin rank. The examiner took up position between them and asked, Ready? Both boys gave a curt nod. With a sharp downward sweep of his hand, the examiner declared, Begin! He stepped back, leaving Nathan and Takakura Shota to face off in silence, the tension between them crackling like electricity. Nathan noticed the serious glint in Takakura Shota's eyes and knew an attack was coming. Without wasting another second, he snapped open his ninja pouch, plucked out a handful of shurikens, and tossed them with a flick of his wrist. The motion looked effortless, but each blade flew with deadly precision, cutting off every conceivable escape route. Just as he'd calculated, Gaokang Zhengtai had no choice but to meet the assault head-on. A staccato chorus of metal on metal rang out, ding ding ding, as Gaokang Zhengtai slammed his kunai against the incoming shurikens, deflecting every one. His technique was solid, no doubt about it, but Nathan wasn't finished. Exploiting his opponent's brief distraction, he threaded his fingers into a swift hand seal and unleashed the flash body technique. In the blink of an eye, he vanished from sight. Nathan reappeared just 2 paces away, directly in front of Gaokang Zhengtai. The reaction was instantaneous. Gaokang Zhengtai pivoted on his heel and thrust his kunai upward, aiming straight for Nathan's throat. The battlefield had shifted in an instant, and now it was a test of pure reflex and resolve. Nathan perceived every movement of his opponent as though in slow motion, an effect of his Sharingan, its twin Magatama, granting him far keener insight than the single Kama variant. Before the kunai could reach him, he slipped sideways. As the blade's arc swung wide, he drove his knee into Shota's abdomen. The impact forced a painful groan from Shota's lips and sent him tumbling backward. Yet Shota refused to stay down. He landed in a forward roll, sprang up clutching another kunai, and braced himself for Nathan's next strike. To his surprise, Nathan didn't attack. Confused, Shota stared at him, only to lock eyes with those burning scarlet tomei. A wave of dizziness washed over Shota. Reality seemed to warp and blur. When his senses returned, a kunai's cold tip was resting at his throat. Heat rushed to his face as he swallowed hard, voice trembling. I surrender. Chapter 80, Imaginary Enemy. Second round goes to Uchiha Nathan. At the examiner's announcement, Nathan lowered his kunai, stepped back twice, and without a word, headed for the stairs. His expression remained ice-cold, no invitation for chatter or congratulations. Keeping curious onlookers at arm's length suited him just fine. He preferred to move on without fuss. As he climbed, the spectators erupted into a buzz of disbelief. Nathan didn't need to strain his ears to catch snippets of shocked commentary. How can he be this strong? That was ridiculously fast. Indeed, from the moment their blades met to Gao Kong Zhengtai's immediate surrender, barely 2 minutes had elapsed, and the official match clock showed just over 10 seconds. To the Jinin and Chunin hopefuls watching, that kind of speed was nearly inconceivable. Only the veteran Shinobi in the stands exchanged knowing glances. They recognized a level of skill far beyond the ordinary. The match felt over almost before it began. Nathan's victory was so effortless it bordered on arrogance, but what he demonstrated was nothing less than a complete mastery of combat technique and battlefield awareness. Combined with his expertly wielded Sharingan, it was no surprise the bout was decided in an instant. Yet even seasoned shinobi watching ringside couldn't hide their astonishment at the scale of his domination. Among the impressed was Uchiha Haruto, who realized with a start that he and several clan elders had been so fixated on Shisui's potential that they'd overlooked another prodigy, Uchiha Nathan. Admittedly, Nathan might not rival Shisui in raw talent, but he unquestionably outmatched the vast majority of his peers. After today, the elders will have to keep a much closer eye on Nathan, Haruto thought, conviction stirring in his chest. No sooner had the crowd's applause died down than the third round commenced. This time, 2 of the female contenders stepped forward. Nathan recognized one of them instantly, Aoki Hongzi from Nara Chengping's team, the girl he'd dispatched so decisively in an earlier bout. While she'd shown flashes of promise, she was clearly on a different level than Nathan's next opponent, whose skills, Nathan noted, would present a far more interesting challenge. At least in raw physical prowess, Aoki Hongzi held a slight edge over her opponent, and in the end she leveraged that advantage to squeak out a narrow victory. Match 3 goes to Aoki Hongzi. The examiner's voice rang out at exactly the right moment. Great job, Hongzi, called Sato Masaru from the second-floor corridor as she stepped off the stage. No sooner had they left than the examiner summoned the next pair for match 4. One bout melted into the next, and before long, it was time for the penultimate fight. Uchiha Shisui, the announcement boomed. His opponent's name followed immediately, Nara Narihei. Narihei's heart sank. He'd already crossed blades with Nathan back in the second phase of the exams, and now here he was, facing another Uchiha prodigy in his very first match of this stage. Striding onto the field, he met Shisui's gaze and felt a chill. The 2 Tomoe Sharingan glowed ominously beneath his heavy lids. What did he do to deserve this? True, to climb the rankings he'd have to overcome Uchiha talent, but not like this, without so much as a moment to prepare. The Nara clan prided itself on outsmarting every opponent, yet today, fate had snatched away his best weapon, time. Now all Narihei could do was steel himself and hope his wit, however pressed, could still see him through. If you're fighting blind, no matter how brilliant your mind, it won't save you. Take this fight against Uchiha Shisui. All I know is that, like me, he wields a pair of Sharingan and carries a sword, so he's probably a master swordsman. But beyond that, his combat experience, his fighting style, his habits, I'm in the dark. How can I hope to win? Nathan forced himself to breathe slowly. The duel had already begun on the second-floor corridor. From his vantage point, he watched Nara Shihei eyes square off against Shisui. Shihei fought with his head rather than his fists. Though he knew almost nothing about Shisui, he adapted on the fly, drawing on his clan's inherited shadow technique and his own skill in close quarters. For now, he'd managed to hold his ground. But Nathan knew that once Shisui decided to get serious, Shihei wouldn't last long. All they could do was take it one step at a time and hope they uncovered Shisui's weaknesses before it was too late. Nathan watched silently, realizing that from the very start of the clash to this moment, Shisui Uchiha had never once revealed his true strength. He never employed his Sharingan's illusions or unleashed ninjutsu, instead relying solely on flawless swordplay. It wasn't mercy or negligence. Shisui was methodically probing Narihira's limits. Once he understood Narihira's full range of abilities, finishing him would be a mere formality, just as he'd swiftly dispatched Takakura Shota not long ago. With Shota, his power lay bare at first glance, leaving no need for testing. Narihira was another story. Charging in blind could backfire, yielding more losses than victories. Shisui's cautious restraint spoke volumes, yet Nathan sensed the moment of reckoning drawing near. A real offensive was about to begin. The reason was simple. Shisui had already mapped out Narihira's strength. Pressing on with more feints would only squander time and invite unforeseen variables. After all, Nara clan shinobi were famed for their cunning minds, and Shisui had no desire to be caught off guard. Nathan knew that given enough time, their opponents would find a way to turn the tide. The faster they ended the fight, the better. Sure enough, events unfolded exactly as he'd predicted. Before long, Uchiha Shisui revealed his true strength, unleashing a combination of Sharingan Genjutsu and powerful ninjutsu in one seamless assault. In a flash, Narihira found himself on the back foot, driven to desperation. With barely a breath to spare, Shisui pressed the flat of his sword against Narihira's throat, forcing the surrender. Watching from the sidelines, Nathan murmured to himself, Uchiha-style swordsmanship, around a level 3. Shisui had deployed the clan's treasured kenjutsu, and from the fluidity of his strikes against Narihira, Nathan estimated it to be roughly one tier below his own mastery of Uchiha-style swordsmanship. On top of that, Nathan's proficiency in Konoha-style blade work was even higher. Together, those two forms gave him a clear advantage in close-quarters combat, enough to overwhelm Shisui if the need arose. As for long-range techniques, Nathan had taken note of the fiery escape jutsu Shisui had just used. If that truly reflected Shisui's skill at a distance, Nathan felt confident he could counter it without breaking a sweat. Nathan's only true concern was the level of genjutsu his opponent could cast. Both he and Uchiha Shisui bore the same dual Magatama Sharingan, but did that guarantee they were evenly matched? Nathan didn't see Shisui as an imaginary threat. After watching the last several bouts, he was convinced that only he and Shisui still had a shot at victory. Their clash was inevitable. As Nathan studied Shisui's unfazed expression, Shisui met his gaze, almost as if he'd sensed Nathan watching him. They converged in midair, eyes ablaze with competitive fire. Over the past 8 months of traveling through this world, Nathan had trained relentlessly, sharpening every skill in his arsenal. And now at last, he stood face to face with someone of his own generation, someone famous, someone named, worthy of a true test. In that moment, Nathan couldn't help but measure his progress against Shisui's formidable talent. Not out of arrogance, but out of a deep need to prove that his sacrifices and relentless practice had meant something. That burning desire to validate all he'd endured was the spark that fueled his fighting spirit.